There is a building on Hester Street. 5 stories of brown brick, 11 apartments, 43 people, 1 boiler in the basement that stopped working 3 weeks ago. Tonight, the temperature outside is 18 degrees. Inside, depending on which floor you live on and how much coal you bought this week, it is somewhere between 26 and 41 degrees. The people inside are doing what people do when the thing that was supposed to protect them stops working. They are burning what they have. They are pushing newspaper into the gaps around the windows. They are making calculations that nobody taught them how to make. One woman knows all of this. She has the key to every door. Her name is Eva Stern. She is 39 years old. She has lived in this building for 6 years and managed it for 14 months. Since her husband died, and the landlord decided that letting her stay was cheaper than finding someone else. She keeps a brown ledger book on the kitchen table. It was meant for rent collection. It has become something else. This is what that winter felt like, from the inside. The keys weighed more than they looked like they should. Eva had noticed this the first morning she carried them alone. The morning after the funeral, when Mr. Harrington came by and left them on the table without quite meeting her eyes and said he would be in touch about the arrangement. 11 keys for 11 apartments, plus the boiler room, the rooftop, and the coal cellar in the basement. She picked them up and the weight surprised her. Not heavy, exactly, heavier than expected. That was 14 months ago. By November of 1901, she no longer noticed the weight. She carried the keys the way she carried everything that had become necessary, without thinking about it. The way you stopped noticing the sound of the street after enough years of living above it. It was a Tuesday in the 2nd week of November when she made her rounds to collect the rent. She always started at the 1st floor and worked her way up. Always knocked with the same 3 knocks that everyone in the building had learned to recognize as hers and not a stranger's. The building at 97 Hester Street was 5 stories of brown brick, built in 1889 by a contractor whose name no one remembered. It stood between a dry goods store and a tailor who worked out of the front window. From the street, it looked like every other tenement on the block, which looked like every other block in the Lower East Side. The city had built these buildings to hold as many people as possible in as little space as possible, and it had succeeded. Eva knocked on the door of apartment 1A. Mrs. Rosen opened it before the 3rd knock. She had been awake since 4 in the morning. Eva knew this, not because Mrs. Rosen had told her, but because in 6 years of living in this building, she had learned the sounds of each apartment the way you learned the sounds of a house you grew up in, without deciding to learn them, just by being there long enough. The Rosens started at 4. The sewing machine ran from 5. The children came out of the back room at 6:30. The apartment was 3 rooms and housed 7 people. Mr. and Mrs. Rosen, their 4 children ranging from 6 to 14, and Mrs. Rosen's mother, who sat in the corner near the stove and did not look up when Eva came in. The old woman had decided several years ago that Eva was part of the furniture of her life and could be ignored accordingly. Eva did not take this personally. The front room was where Mr. Rosen worked. His sewing machine sat near the window for the light, and he ran it from 5 in the morning until 7 at night, making piece work for a factory on Canal Street that paid him by the garment rather than by the hour. The sound of the machine was the first sound of the building's day and the last sound of its evening. As reliable as a clock. Mrs. Rosen counted out the rent from an envelope she kept inside a coffee tin on the shelf above the stove. $6.50. She counted it twice before handing it to Eva. Eva counted it once, wrote the amount in the ledger, and gave Mrs. Rosen a receipt that Mrs. Rosen folded and put back in the tin. The boiler, Mrs. Rosen said. Still running? Eva said. This was true. The boiler was still running in November. Mrs. Rosen looked at her with the look of a woman who had been told true things that were not the whole truth many times and had learned to identify the difference. It makes a sound, she said. I know. What kind of sound? Eva thought about how to describe it. She had been thinking about it for 3 weeks. Not broken. Not working. Something in between those two things. Like a person who is sick, but does not yet know they are sick. I'm looking into it, Eva said. Mrs. Rosen nodded with her mouth in a position that meant she understood this to be the end of that conversation. Thea, she said. I have to get to Metzger, Eva said. She went back to the hall. Apartment 1B was Mr. Metzger, 71 years old, from Krakow, a former shoemaker who no longer had the eyesight to make shoes and now did small repairs for people in the building in exchange for whatever they had to give him. He answered the door in his coat, which he wore inside, as a matter of principle, from the 1st of November through the end of March. Mrs. Stern, he said. Rent. He went to the shelf where he kept his money in a small wooden box and counted out his $6 in a combination of bills and coins that always came to exactly the right amount. Not a cent over. Eva wrote it down, gave him the receipt. He folded it and put it in the box. The boiler, he said. Still running, Eva said. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was measuring. It will not run much longer, he said. You can hear it. I know. Your husband could have fixed it. I know that too, Eva said. She went back to the hall. The second floor was the Ferraras in 2A and Mrs. Zielinska and her daughter Marta in 2B. The Ferraras were 7 people from Naples, including a cousin named Giorgio, who had arrived 4 weeks ago, and was sleeping on the kitchen floor on a bedroll. He folded up each morning and put behind the door. Mrs. Ferrara spoke no English and almost no Yiddish. She and Eva had established about 30 words between them over 3 years, plus the gesture vocabulary that 2 women developed when they needed to communicate about practical matters and shared language was not available. Mrs. Zielinska into B was a Polish widow. Her daughter Marta was 16, worked the day shift at a shirtwaist factory on Green Street, and was learning English at the settlement house on Henry Street 3 evenings a week. Eva had decided, watching her over 2 years, that Marta was going to be fine, whatever fine meant in this city and in this time. The 3rd floor was the Kaufmans. Mrs. Kaufman was expecting their 4th child in January and moved through the apartment with the careful, deliberate movement of a woman who had learned that her body required more attention than she would prefer to give it. The 4th floor had Herschel and David in 4A, 2 men from the same village in Poland who had found each other in New York the way immigrants found each other, through synagogue connections and street corner Yiddish and the web of Landsmannschaften that functioned as an underground telegraph for for the Jewish Lower East Side. They split the rent and had a system for everything, including who bought the coal, and who carried it up the stairs, and who banked the fire at night. 4B was Miss Miriam Cohen, 24 years old, from Vilna, who taught at a Hebrew school during the day and studied English at night school on the evenings. She was not at the settlement house. She paid her rent alone, $7 a month, more than any other apartment in the building, because alone cost more. The fifth floor was Eva and Lena. Eva collected 11 envelopes of rent that Tuesday, went upstairs, and counted everything twice. The building had paid her $41.12 for November. Harrington would receive $31. She would keep $8.12 for building expenses. She would also keep $12 for herself and Lena. She opened the ledger and wrote the numbers down. Then she picked up her pen and wrote something she had not planned to write in the margin next to the date, because it had been sitting in her chest for 3 weeks and needed somewhere to go. The boiler has been making a sound for 3 weeks. Not broken, not working, something in between. I have not told Harrington. I do not know how to tell Harrington. She looked at what she had written. Then she left it there and closed the ledger. From the bedroom, she heard Lena cough once. She waited. No second cough came. She went to make dinner. The 45 minutes between when Lena fell asleep and when Eva fell asleep were the only 45 minutes of the day that belonged entirely to Eva. She used them at the kitchen table with a ledger and a cup of tea that was never as hot as she wanted it by the time she sat down. This was when she did the arithmetic that running a building actually required, which was different from the arithmetic Harrington thought it required. She opened the ledger to the November page and went through the numbers the way she went through them every month. Not because she had forgotten them, but because writing them down a second time made them real in a way that memory did not. Rent received $41.12. Harrington's portion, $31. Building expenses, $8.12. Eva's portion for herself and Lena, $12. From the $8.12 she needed to buy coal for the boiler. A normal November ran about 90 pounds a week at $1.25 per 100 pounds. That was approximately $4.50 for the month. She needed to keep a reserve for small repairs. That left about $3.60. In a normal November meant the boiler was running correctly. A boiler running correctly meant the steam heat went to every apartment and each family's coal stove was a supplement rather than a primary source. The boiler was not running correctly. She picked up her pen and wrote the letter she had been composing in her head for 3 days. Careful English. The English she had learned first from her husband, and then from 14 months of writing letters to a man who lived in Midtown and collected money from buildings he did not live in. Dear Mr. Harrington, she wrote, I am writing to inform you of a concern regarding the building's boiler. For approximately 3 weeks, I have observed an irregular sound during operation, which suggests a mechanical issue. I would be grateful if you could arrange for an inspection at your earliest convenience. She read what she had written. It was accurate. It was also, she understood, the kind of letter that a busy man could set aside without feeling he had done anything wrong. She sealed it and set it with the outgoing mail. Then she opened the ledger to the margin and wrote boiler sound. 3 weeks. Metzger says it will not last. I think he is right. She looked at the number $3.60. She thought about what that number became if the boiler stopped working in December. The Rosens had told her that last January. A cold month. They had burned 280 pounds of coal just to keep 3 rooms at a livable temperature, at $1.25 per 100 pounds. That was $3.50 for one family. For 1 month, 7 families multiplied by 3 or 4 months of winter. She sat with that arithmetic. Harrington's reply came 9 days later. 1 sheet of paper in a plain envelope, written in the confident hand of a man who did not worry about his penmanship. Mrs. Stern, thank you for your note about the boiler. I will have someone look at it after the holiday period. These things are often less serious than they appear. Best regards, H. Harrington. After the holiday period. It was November 22nd. The holiday period was Christmas, which was December 25th. 33 days away. Eva put the letter in the back pocket of the ledger. Then she opened the margin and copied down the key phrase. After the holiday period. She underlined it. Not in anger, because it was the deadline, and deadlines needed to be visible. That night the temperature dropped to 22 degrees. The boiler kept running. Not well, but running. On the morning of December 3rd, Eva came downstairs at 5:30 to check on it, which had become part of her morning routine. She stood in the basement with a candle. The boiler was cold. Not cooling down, cold. The fire had gone out at some point in the night. Hours ago, from the feel of the metal, when she put her hand to it. The basement was the same temperature as the air outside, which was 16 degrees. She could start a fire in the boiler. Her husband had shown her how. But starting the fire was not the problem. The problem was whatever had caused the fire to go out in the first place, the mechanical issue she had been writing about for 3 weeks. Starting the fire without fixing the problem meant the fire would go out again. She stood in the basement long enough for the candle to burn down a 1/4 inch. Then she went upstairs to tell people something she did not know how to say. Eva knocked on the door of apartment 1A at 5:45 in the morning with cold hands and no good news. Mrs. Rosen opened it before the second knock. She was already dressed. The machine was not running yet, but the stove was going. Eva could see the orange light of it through the gap in the curtain that divided the front room from the kitchen. And the smell of the apartment was coal burning and bread from yesterday, and the particular human warmth of 7 people who had been sleeping in 3 rooms. The boiler, Mrs. Rosen said. She said it the way you said something you had been waiting to say. It went out last night. Eva said, I am working on getting it repaired. Mrs. Rosen looked at her, not with anger, with the look of a woman who has been given accurate information and is now doing arithmetic. Come in, she said. You look cold. Eva came in. She had not planned to sit. She had 11 doors to knock on, and the morning was already started, and she needed to tell everyone before they discovered it themselves. But Mrs. Rosen poured her a cup of tea without asking and set it on the table. And the room was warmer than any other room Eva had been in since 4:30 this morning. And she sat The stove was a cast iron range, black, about 30 inches wide, sitting on 4 legs, in the corner where the kitchen met the front room. It was not a new stove. It had come with the apartment when the Rosens moved in 5 years ago, and before that it had come with whoever lived there before them. You could see the history of it in the patches of different paint on the legs and the way one of the oven doors hung slightly lower than the other, because the hinge had been repaired at least twice. But it was running. The fire in it was going steadily, not roaring. The way a fire went when someone who knew what they were doing had banked it the night before and left it enough air to breathe through the night without burning through all the coal at once. Eva looked at the stove the way she had looked at it 100 times and had not looked at it before. A cast iron stove in a tenement apartment in 1901 was not one thing. It was every warm thing the apartment had. It was where Mrs. Rosen cooked the food that kept 7 people fed. It was where the water heated for washing, which happened in a basin because the building had cold running water but not hot. It was where the wet clothes went to dry, because wet clothes in a room below 40 degrees did not dry. They froze, and frozen clothes were not clothes. It was where the children gathered in the morning before school, because the back room where they slept was 20 degrees colder than the front room, and you did not linger in 20 degrees if you could help it. It was the reason Mrs. Rosen's mother sat in the same chair every day, because that chair was 3 feet from the stove, and 3 feet from the stove was the best address in the apartment. The stove decided who was warm and who was cold. It decided when the day started and when it ended, because the day ended when the fire was banked, and the heat began to drop, and there was no longer a reason to sit up. "How long will it take?" Mrs. Rosen said. "I don't know," Eva said. "I've written to Mr. Harrington. He will send someone. When? I don't know that either." Mrs. Rosen looked at her tea. "Last January," she said, "we burned 280 pounds of coal in this stove. That was with the boiler working." Eva had written that number in the ledger margin 2 weeks ago. She had been carrying it since then like a stone in a pocket. "Without the boiler?" Mrs. Rosen said. "It will be more. The walls are cold. The floor is cold. The stove has to work harder to keep the same temperature." She said this without drama, as a woman who had spent years paying attention to what things cost. 350 pounds, maybe 400, depending on how cold it gets. 400 pounds of coal at $1.25 per 100 pounds was $5 per month for the Rosens alone. Eva thought about the other 10 apartments. "I'll get it fixed as fast as I can," she said. Mrs. Rosen nodded. Then she said, quietly, as Eva stood to go, the cracks in the window frame. "In the kitchen, you can stuff them with newspaper. It keeps more heat in than you'd think." "I'll remember that," Eva said. "Tell the others too," Mrs. Rosen said. "Most of them don't know." Eva went back into the hallway. She knocked on every door and said the same things with slight variations depending on who opened it. She was efficient about it. She had learned in 14 months of managing this building that efficiency in difficult conversations was a form of kindness, because it reduced the amount of time people spent in the uncomfortable place between not knowing and knowing. Mr. Metzger said he would be fine. He said it the way he said everything. as a fact, in his coat and his hat. The hat being unusual for indoors and telling her something about the temperature of his apartment that he was not telling her directly. Mrs. Ferrara looked at her two small children and did not say anything at all. Mrs. Zielinska asked when. Marta, standing behind her mother, asked the same question in English, more directly, because she was 16 and had decided that direct was the right approach to a city that did not give you anything you did not ask for specifically. Mrs. Kaufman put one hand on her stomach and one hand on the door frame. David opened the door to 4A and told her Herschel's fever had come back the night before. He said it quietly, glancing back into the apartment. Eva asked if they needed anything. David said they were fine. He said it the way you said it when you were not entirely fine, but fine was the only acceptable answer. Miriam Cohen in 4B was already dressed for school, her coat on inside the apartment, her bag over her shoulder. I know, Miriam said, before Eva could begin. I called Harrington's office from the school telephone last night. I heard the boiler stop, and I did not wait for the morning. Eva looked at her. They said they would pass the message along, Miriam said. Eva had not known this. She stood in the doorway and felt something she would not have been able to name precisely if asked. Gratitude, and something smaller and less comfortable underneath it. Thank you, she said. She went up to the 5th floor. Lena was at the table with bread and tea she had made herself. Eva sat across from her and opened the ledger. She found the page where she tracked building information and added a new column. She had not planned to add a new column. It came out of her the way things came out when you had been thinking around something long enough that the thing found its own shape. She wrote the name of each family at the top of a row. Next to each name, she wrote what she knew about their coal supply based on what she had seen that morning. It was not precise. It was the best information she had. She wrote it down because the things you did not write down were the things that surprised you later. And she had decided she did not want to be surprised. From the bedroom, she heard Lena set down her teacup. Then Lena appeared in the doorway. Are you writing about the boiler? She said. Yes, Eva said. Is it bad? Eva looked at the page. It is a problem, she said. We are going to solve it. Lena looked at the ledger and then at her mother. She had her father's dark eyes and the particular quality of observation that made Eva feel, sometimes, like she was being studied. Okay, she said. She went back to her bread. Eva looked at the new column in the ledger for another moment. Then she closed it and went to start the stove. Eva mailed the second letter to Harrington on the morning of November 28th, before the boiler went out, when the problem was still a sound and not a silence. But this chapter is not about that letter. It is about what happened on the morning of December 7th, when Eva walked to the post office with Lena to mail the urgent follow-up, the one with the word urgent at the top of the page, and the specific numbers she had not included before because she had been trying to be polite. Hester Street at 8 in the morning in December. The street was loud in the way the Lower East Side was always loud, which was the particular loudness of a place where too many people were trying to do too many things in too little space, and had decided the solution was to be louder about it. Pushcart vendors were setting up along the curb, their breath coming in white clouds. A man was selling apples from a wooden crate. A woman with a basket of bread on her arm was moving fast through the crowd. Shoulders forward, not looking at anything she did not need to look at. Lena walked beside Eva with her hand in her mother's coat pocket, which was her way of holding hands when she had decided she was too old to hold hands. Eva had been pretending not to notice this arrangement for several months. At the corner of Hester and Essex, Eva stopped. There was a pawn shop on the corner. In the window was a man's winter coat. Heavy wool, good quality, the kind that went to the knee. Someone's good coat. They had brought it here for the money it would get them, which would be less than it was worth and less than it would cost to replace. Her husband had had a coat like that. She had given it away after he died to the Landsmannschaft, the mutual aid society that distributed donated goods to families who needed them. She had held it for a long time before putting it in the bag. The coat had been in the building longer than she had, longer than the arrangement with Harrington, longer than the ledger. She had given it away because keeping it was one kind of cost and giving it away was a different kind, and she had chosen the one she could afford. "Mama," Lena said. "I'm here," Eva said. They went to the post office. Eva mailed the letter. They came home. The reply came 6 days later, December 10th, 4 centons. He appreciated her concern. Arrangements were being made. Please assure the tenants. Timely fashion. Timely fashion. A phrase with no specific number in it. Eva read the letter at the kitchen table. Lena was eating oatmeal across from her. Outside the window, the temperature was 11 degrees. The building had been without boiler heat for 7 days. "Is the letter about the heat?" Lena said. "Yes," Eva said. "What does it say?" Eva folded the letter. "It says someone is coming. When? It doesn't say exactly." Lena considered this. "Then, it's not a very useful letter," she said. "No," Eva said. "It's not." She put the letter in the back pocket of the ledger with Harrington's first reply. Then she opened to the page where she had been writing the numbers. She did not have a column for, and she wrote December 10th. Harrington arrangements being made. Timely fashion. Boiler has been out 7 days. Lena's cough started day 4. She wrote that last line and stopped. She looked at it. Lena's cough had started on the 4th day after the boiler went out. Not a bad cough. The kind that came and went. Twice in the morning and once at night. The cough of a child who was cold. Eva had been telling herself this for 3 days. She still believed it. But she had written it down now. And writing it down meant she was watching it. She opened a fresh page and wrote 2 columns. At the top of the first column, what I know. At the top of the second, what I don't know. Under what I know, she wrote 7 days without heat. Outside temperature, between 11 and 22 degrees this week. Coal prices at the Canal Street supplier, $1.25 per 100 pounds. 43 people in 11 apartments. Lena's cough started day 4. Under what I don't know, she wrote, when Harrington will send someone. What is wrong with the boiler? How much it will cost to fix? Whether Harrington will pay for it? How long the Metzger coal supply will last? Whether Herschel's fever is getting better or worse? She looked at the 2 columns. The what I don't know column was longer. She left both on the page and closed the ledger. She went to check on Lena, who was in the back room doing her school reading by the gray light of the afternoon window, which in December on the 5th floor of a north-facing tenement was a gray and limited light, not much better than candlelight, but free. "Are you warm enough?" Eva said. "Yes," Lena said. Without looking up, Eva put her hand on the back of Lena's neck, gently, the way you checked a child's temperature without making it a thing the child needed to worry about. Lena was cold. Eva went back to the kitchen and put another piece of coal on the fire. She stood at the stove and watched the room respond to it, which took about 7 minutes. Then she put the kettle on and went to sit with Lena while the water heated. And she brought the ledger with her. And she sat in the chair across from her daughter and opened to a fresh page and began writing the letter she would send Harrington in the morning, the one that was different from the others, the one that used the word urgent for the second time and included the number of people and the number of days and the specific temperatures she had been recording in the new column. Outside the window, Hester Street was getting dark. Inside, the stove was doing its work. Eva wrote until the kettle boiled. Eva was at the door of apartment 1A at 5:30 in the morning. She had been awake since 4. She had lain in bed in the dark, listening to the building, which was something she had started doing after her husband died and had not stopped. The building had its own sounds at night, separate from the sounds of the street. The particular vocabulary of a structure that had been standing for 12 years and had learned to express itself in wood and pipe and plaster. Since the boiler went out, the building had been quieter at night. This was not a good quiet. It was the quiet of a building losing heat, the wood contracting, the metal cooling, the whole structure pulling inward against the cold, the way a person pulled inward, shoulders up, breath held. She got up at 4, dressed in 2 sweaters and her coat over her house dress, and the wool socks her mother had knitted before she died, the ones Eva had kept through 6 apartments and 2 cities and 1 ocean crossing, because they were good wool and her mother had made them. She stoked the stove with 2 pieces of coal. She put the kettle on. She sat at the table with the ledger and looked at what she had to go say to 11 doors. The arithmetic was not complicated. The boiler was out. It had been out for 7 days. Harrington had replied with a letter that said, timely fashion, and did not say a date. The temperature last night had been 14 degrees. 43 people in this building were all finding out this morning, if they had not already found out, that the situation had not changed. Eva was not responsible for the boiler. She had written the letters. She had used the word urgent. She had done what she could do with what she had. But she was the one with the keys. She was the one who knocked on the doors. And the people behind those doors were going to look at her the way people looked at the person standing in front of them when they needed something, with the full weight of the needing, regardless of whether that person was actually the one responsible for the need. She had learned this in the first month after her husband died, learned it from the way the building looked at her, learned it from the way she looked back. She finished her tea and went downstairs. Mrs. Rosen's door opened before Eva finished the knock. Mrs. Rosen was in her coat. The machine was not running, but she was at the door and her coat was on, and her face had the look of someone who had been waiting at a bus stop for a long time and had decided to stop expecting the bus at any particular time and simply wait. "Still no heat," she said. "Still no heat." Eva said, "Mr. Harrington has been notified. He says someone is coming." "When?" "The letter doesn't say exactly." Mrs. Rosen looked at her with the look of a woman who had been told true things that were not the whole truth many times. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "I have the other apartments." "1 minute," Mrs. Rosen said. Eva came in. Mrs. Rosen went to the stove. She picked up the coal bucket and looked into it. And whatever she saw there was consistent with whatever calculation she had already been doing, because she set the bucket down with the expression of someone whose arithmetic had come out the way they expected and not the way they wanted. 3 days, she said. Maybe 4, if I don't run the stove as hot as I'd like. She was talking about coal. "The man on Canal Street," Eva said, "will open at 7. I know when he opens," Mrs. Rosen said. Not unkindly. She went back to the bucket and picked it up and set it near the door, ready for when she would go. Then she looked at Eva with the look she had when she was about to say something she had been working up to. "The Metzger," she said. "He was going to go to Canal Street yesterday, and I don't think he did. He was coughing when I came past his door in the evening." Eva held this without writing it down. She would remember. She had learned to hold things in her head during the day and write them down at night. "I'll check on him," Eva said. She went across the hall to 1B. She knocked 3 times and waited and knocked again and then heard his voice from inside, saying something in Yiddish that she understood as, "Hold on a minute." He opened the door in his coat and his hat. The hat was unusual for indoors, and telling her something about the temperature of his apartment, he was not telling her directly. She understood the hat when she felt the air coming out of the apartment, which was colder than the hallway. "Mr. Metzger," she said, "how much coal do you have?" He looked at her, and she could see him deciding whether to tell her the truth. "Enough," he said. "For how long?" "Enough," he said again. Eva looked past him into the apartment. She could see the coal bucket near the stove from where she stood. It was not quite empty, but it was close. "The Canal Street supplier opens at 7, she said. "I know when he opens," he said. And again, it was not unkind, just accurate. "I'll come back later today," Eva said. He nodded. He looked like he had not slept well. "I have lived through worse," he said. He said it to himself as much as to her. "I know you have," Eva said. She went upstairs. She knocked on every remaining door. Mrs. Ferrara said nothing, but looked at her 2 small children with the look that required no translation. Mrs. Zielinska asked when, and Marta asked the same question directly in English. Mrs. Kaufman put one hand on her stomach. Dovid told her Herschel was still running a low fever. And Miriam Cohen, already in her coat for school, said, "I found someone. A boiler repairman on Delancey Street. His name is Adelman. I saw his sign last week and I wrote down the address." Eva looked at her. "I thought it might be useful," Miriam said. She held out a small piece of paper with an address written on it in precise handwriting. "I don't know his rates, but I know where his shop is." Eva took the paper. 24 years old. Had called Harrington's office the night the boiler stopped. Had found the repairman on Delancey Street. Had written down the address and held it in case it became useful. "Thank you," Eva said. She went upstairs. She did one thing before she went back to the ledger. She went to the closet in the back of the apartment where she kept the things she had not decided what to do with. The items from the first year after the funeral that she had not been able to give away and had not been able to use. Near the back she found what she was looking for. A blanket, heavy wool, dark gray. From the bed she and her husband had shared? The one she had replaced with a lighter one because the heavy one made her feel something she was not ready to feel at night. In the dark. In the second month after the funeral, she took it downstairs to the 4th floor. David was still at the door. He looked at the blanket in her hands, and his expression moved through something she did not look at directly. "For the bed," Eva said. "It's warm." David took it. He held it for a moment in both hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Stern," he said. She went back upstairs. Lena was at the table with her school bag packed, ready to go. "You gave them something," Lena said. She had the quality of knowing things she had not been told, the way children did, when they were paying close attention and adults had stopped noticing. "A blanket," Eva said. Lena looked at her mother for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and went to school. Eva sat at the table and opened the ledger. She found the page with the new column, the names and the coal estimates, and she updated what she knew from this morning. Metzger, low on coal. Will not say so. Ferrara, 2 small children. Managing. Herschel fever still present. 4th floor north window is a gap I should have fixed before the coal. Miriam found Adelman on Delancey Street. Address in hand. Then she wrote below the column. In the margin, where she wrote the things that had no column. 8 doors this morning. Nobody shouted. Nobody asked me to do something I cannot do. They just wanted to know that someone knew. She looked at that last sentence. Then she closed the ledger and went to see what the stove needed. The coal supplier on Canal Street was a man named Petrovich, who had been selling coal in the same building for 11 years and had the manner of a man who understood that what he sold was not a commodity, but a necessity, and who had decided this understanding required from him no particular warmth. His shop was a ground-floor space with a scale near the front and sacks of coal along the back wall, and a window that was always slightly gray from the coal dust that settled on everything regardless of how often it was wiped. He opened at 7 and closed at 5, and on cold mornings there was a line outside his door before 7, which he neither acknowledged nor responded to. He opened at 7. The people outside could wait, or they could not wait, and either way the coal was the same price. Eva arrived at 6:55 on the morning of December 6th with 62 cents in her coat pocket and an empty canvas bag. The line had 4 people in it already. She stood in line and put her hands in her pockets and waited. The temperature was 14 degrees. The door opened at 7. Petrovich weighed her coal on the scale with the care of a man for whom a pound was a pound and not a matter of interpretation. 50 pounds. 75 cents at the bulk rate? 1.5 cents a pound. Eva had 62 cents. She looked at the scale and then at Petrovich's. "I can do 40 pounds for 60 cents, he said. He said it without any expression. 50, Eva said. "I'll bring the difference tomorrow." Petrovich looked at her. He had a way of looking at people that was precise. The look of a man who had made exceptions before and had a clear internal accounting of how those exceptions had resolved. "You're from the Hester Street building," he said. "The one with the boiler. News traveled in this neighborhood the way news traveled in any neighborhood where people stood in lines together." "Yes," she said. He looked at the scale. Then he put it at 50 pounds. "Bring the 13 cents tomorrow," he said. "I will," she said. She lifted the bag. 50 pounds of coal in a canvas bag was a particular kind of weight. Not the dead weight of something inert, but the dense weight of something that was going to do something when you got it where it needed to go. She had carried this weight before, and she had learned that the way to carry it was close to the body, not out to the side, taking the weight on the center. She went out into the cold. At the corner of Canal and Orchard, she stopped to shift the bag to the other shoulder. She was breathing harder than she should have been. She had not been sleeping enough. Across the street, through the morning crowd, she saw someone she recognized, Mrs. Zielinska, standing outside the coal shop, looking at the door, her hands in her coat pockets. Eva crossed the street. They stood on the corner together. Eva set the coal bag down. The street moved around them. Carts and vendors and children heading to school. "How much do you need?" Eva said. Mrs. Zielinska looked at her. "Enough," she said. The same word as Metska. Eva had the feeling it meant the same thing for both of them. "Let me carry it when we go," Eva said. They went back into the line together. They did not talk much. Talking cost. Warmth, and warmth was what they were there to buy. On the walk back to Hester Street, carrying Mrs. Zielinska's 40 pounds on top of her own 50, switching the bags from shoulder to shoulder. Eva did the arithmetic she had been doing in her head since she left the apartment. 50 pounds at 1.5 cents per pound was 75 cents. At the rate she was burning the stove, 50 pounds would last approximately 3.5 days. 3.5 days meant she needed to buy coal again on Saturday. Saturday, she would have 13 cents to bring back to Petrowick's. After that, she would have 49 cents. 49 cents would buy 32 pounds. 32 pounds would last 2 days. This was not a sustainable arithmetic. She had known this and had been not saying it to herself since the day the boiler went out. The question she had been not asking was what the arithmetic looked like over the full stretch of winter. The boiler had gone out on December 3rd. December, January, February, and sometimes into March were the cold months. She was 11 days in. She had approximately 12 weeks of winter left. The coal she could buy on what she had, at the rate she would burn it to keep herself and Lena at a livable temperature, would run out in approximately 3 weeks. She thought about this while she walked. Mrs. Zielinska was walking beside her without speaking, one hand in her pocket and one at her side, not offering to take her own bag, not making conversation. She was a woman who understood that you did not talk when talking cost something. And right now, everything cost something. At the corner of Hester Street, before they turned, Eva stopped. Mrs. Zielinska, she said. Marta told me about the knitting orders. When your hands stiffen, Mrs. Zielinska looked at her. If there is a day when it is very cold, Eva said, and you need to work, you can bring your knitting to my apartment. It is the same temperature as yours. But there is another person there, and another person makes it warmer. She did not say, I have noticed that you live alone, and the cold hits you differently when you live alone. She said what she said, which was practical and true, and contained the other things inside it. Mrs. Zielinska looked at the street for a moment. Thank you, Mrs. Stern, she said. They walked the rest of the way to the building. Eva carried the coal up to each apartment. Mrs. Zielinska's first. She refused to take anything for it. She was not being charitable. She was doing the calculation she had been doing all morning, which was that the building made it through the winter as a building, not as 11 separate apartments. And the coal she carried up 2 flights of stairs for a woman whose hands stiffened in the cold was part of what that meant. She came back to her apartment at 9:15. Lena was at school. The room had warmed from the morning's coal and was sitting at approximately 40 degrees, which was cold enough to see your breath if you breathed slowly, and warm enough to work without a coat if you kept moving. She added the new coal to the bucket and sat at the table and opened the ledger. She turned to the page where she had been tracking the coal supply for each apartment and updated what she knew from this morning. Then she opened a new page and wrote at the top December Arithmetic. She wrote out the full calculation, her supply, her cost, her remaining money, the weeks of winter left. When she finished, she looked at the number at the bottom of the page. 3 weeks. At the current rate, with the current money. Approximately 3 weeks until she could not buy coal. She sat with this. Then she wrote in the margin, Harrington receives $31 per month from this building. The cost to run this building through winter without a working boiler is approximately $40 in additional coal for 11 apartments. These 2 numbers are related. I am going to think about how. She looked at that last sentence. She had not known what she was going to write when she started writing it. It had come out of the pen the way the other marginal notes came out. From the part of her that was thinking things she had not yet organized into words. She was going to think about how those 2 numbers were related, because numbers that were related had a conversation with each other eventually. Whether you arranged the conversation or it arranged itself, she would rather arrange it. She closed the ledger. She put more water on for tea, because tea was hot, and hot was what the room needed. And the coal for the kettle was already burning anyway. She stood at the stove and looked at the fire through the grate and thought about the building above her. Each apartment working through the same arithmetic in 11 different ways. And she thought about what it would mean if those 11 different ways could somehow be in the same room at the same time. She did not have an answer yet, but she was going to think about how. The building had a different voice at 2 in the morning. Eva had learned this in the first winter after her husband died, when sleep had been an arrangement she made with herself rather than something that happened naturally. She had spent enough nights awake in the dark to learn the full vocabulary of the building at hours she had not previously been awake to hear. She had learned it the way you learned anything you did not choose to learn, which was by repeated exposure until the knowledge was in you whether you wanted it or not. The 2 in the morning voice was lower than the daytime voice. It was the voice of a building that had stopped performing and was just existing. During the day, there were the Rosen machine and the Ferrara children and the sound of Miriam Cohen's shoes on the stairs. Precise and quick. These were the sounds of people living inside the building. At 2 in the morning, the people were asleep, and the building was what remained. And what remained spoke in wood and pipe, and the long, slow language of a structure answering the cold. The wood contracted first. Eva was lying in bed on the night of December 9th, a Sunday, and she heard the building begin its contraction the way she always heard it, as a series of sounds that started at the top and worked down. The roof joists first, then the 5th floor boards, her floor, contracting away from the nails that held them. A sound like someone taking a step, then another, then the wall studs, pulling toward the cold outside face of the building. A slower and lower sound, sustained. The sound of wood being asked to be colder than it wanted to be. From somewhere below, she heard a cough. Not Lena. Lena was in the next room, and Eva knew Lena's cough by now the way she knew her own heartbeat. This was someone else's cough. Mr. Metzger, possibly, or Herschel, someone for whom the cold was working on the chest, finding the place that was less defended and settling there. The cough came twice and then stopped. Eva listened for a third and did not hear one. She got up. She was already wearing her sweater under her sleeping clothes, which was how she had been sleeping since the boiler went out. The floor was cold through her wool socks. She moved toward the kitchen without a candle because she knew the apartment in the dark, and because the candle was a cost. She opened the stove door. The fire had been banked for the night, reduced to coals covered with ash to slow their burning. A fire banked properly would keep coals alive for 6 to 8 hours, and those coals could start a new fire in the morning without kindling. This was the basic overnight management of a coal stove, the thing every woman in this building did every night. The arithmetic of burning less while maintaining enough to begin from in the morning. She looked at the coals. They were lower than they should have been for 2 in the morning. She had banked the fire at 10. At a correct banking, the coals should have been brighter, holding more heat. These coals were dim. She could feel the difference in the room, the flat quality of air that was getting colder rather than holding. She took one piece of coal from the bucket. One. Small. She set it on the coals and watched it, waiting to see which way it went. The coals caught the new piece slowly. The coal was cold, having sat in a cold room, and cold coal needed longer to catch than coal that had been sitting near heat. She waited. The piece of coal caught. She watched the coals brighten underneath it, the orange deepening from dim to something that gave off actual heat. The radiant heat she could feel on the front of her shins from 3 feet away. She stayed. Not for any particular reason. The fire was going. She did not need to tend it further. She stayed because the floor was cold, and the fire was warm, and it was 2 in the morning, and those were sufficient reasons. This was when she allowed herself to do the thinking she did not do during the day, the thinking that had nowhere to go during the hours when there was always something to address. At 2 in the morning, there was nothing to address. There was only the fire and the building speaking in its cold vocabulary and the knowledge of what she did not know, which was nearly everything that mattered. She did not know when the boiler would be fixed. She did not know if Herschel was getting better or worse. She did not know if Lena's cough was the cough of a healthy child who was cold or the beginning of something else. The kind you could not always tell from a healthy child's cough until you could tell, and by then you already knew. She did not know what Harrington would say when she wrote him again. She had written the word urgent twice. She did not have a third word that was stronger than urgent. She sat on the floor in front of the stove with her knees pulled up, which was warmer than sitting in the chair. Her coat pulled from the hook by the door over her sweater. The coat and the fire and the closed room and her own body heat were keeping the air at approximately 37 degrees, which was above the freezing point of water and below the temperature at which a person's body maintained itself without effort. The building spoke around her. She listened to it the way she had learned to listen to it. Not with alarm, but with attention, parsing the vocabulary of contraction and cold for the sounds that were normal and the sounds that were not. The third-floor pipe, which ran along the east wall of the Kaufman apartment, had a particular knock when the temperature dropped below 22 degrees outside. She heard that knock now, once, twice, then settling into a low and periodic tick below 22 and falling. From somewhere below, the cough again, twice, stopped. She should sleep. She put another piece of coal on the fire. She had told herself one. She used two. She did this calculation, as she did every calculation, in terms of what it meant for Friday, which was the next time she would need to buy coal. 2 pieces instead of 1 meant Friday came slightly sooner. Not by days, but by hours. And hours in a coal budget were something. She went back to bed. She lay in the dark with her coat still on and listened to the building settling and thought about the coal catching, the way the orange had deepened from dim to real, the way a small thing applied to the right place at the right moment changed the temperature of the room. She thought about that until she slept. She woke at 5:30 because she always woke at 5:30 now. She went to the stove. The coals were low but alive. She added 2 pieces of coal and opened the damper to let the fire build. Then put the kettle on and sat at the table with the ledger. She wrote the date. December 10th. She wrote the outside temperature, which she estimated from the knock of the third-floor pipe. She wrote the coal count. Then she looked at the water glass she kept on the windowsill as an experiment, a thin skin of ice on the surface. She wrote 32 in the room overnight. Glass, iced. Then she wrote, heard the cough again. Second night. She looked at those words. Then she wrote below them, going to ask Petrowicz about buying on account. She had not known she was going to write that until she wrote it. Buying on account meant asking Petrowicz to let her take coal now and pay for it when she had the money. It meant telling a man she barely knew that she did not have the money she needed. It meant asking for something in a way that could be refused. She looked at the words on the page. Then she wrote 51 cents remaining. 2.5 days at current rate. 4 days until payday. The gap is the gap. The gap was the gap. She had known it for 3 days and had been writing around it. From the bedroom, she heard Lena shift in her sleep. Then cough. One cough. Short. The morning cough that came with waking up cold. She counted to 20. No second cough. She went to make oatmeal, because oatmeal was hot, and hot was the right thing for a cold morning. And because on a cold morning you made the right thing and did not ask whether you could afford to make the right thing. You made the right thing. Then you figured out the rest. On the morning of December 8th, Eva found out that she had been doing it wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, inefficiently wrong, which, in a coal budget during a broken boiler winter, was a meaningful distinction. She found this out from Mrs. Rosen, who found it out from her mother, who had learned it from her own mother in Warsaw 40 years ago. The knowledge Eva was missing had been available 2 floors below her apartment for the entire time she had been managing the building. It started with how Mrs. Rosen loaded the stove. Eva had come down to 1A on a minor errand. Something about the lock on the hallway window. And when she came in, she found Mrs. Rosen's mother at the stove, doing something Eva had not seen done before. The old woman was arranging the coal pieces in a specific configuration, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone performing a task that had long since become reflex. She set 2 larger pieces leaning against each other at the back of the stove, creating a kind of tent. Smaller pieces went at the front, lower, where the air intake was. One very small piece went on top, angled down. The fire, which had been the low practical fire of a stove running at conservation, changed character. Within 3 minutes, Eva could see the difference in the flame, which was steadier and more even. She could feel the difference in the air. The heat was moving toward the door of the stove, rather than drifting randomly, drawn forward and out into the room, rather than up and out through the flue. "What is she doing?" Eva said to Mrs. Rosen. "Loading the stove," Mrs. Rosen said. "From the table, not the way I load mine. Come sit," Mrs. Rosen said, with a particular patience. Eva sat. "My mother's way," Mrs. Rosen said. "Smaller pieces at the front. Air comes in at the bottom. It goes across the small pieces first, which heat up fast, then hits the bigger pieces in the back, which burn longer. The fire builds itself from front to back, instead of just sitting there." She paused. "We use maybe 15% less coal this way. My mother says 20%, but she is not precise about it. 15% less coal. Over the course of a month. Approximately 6 fewer pounds per week. Over the full winter. The difference between making it and not making it on the coal budget she had. Where did she learn it?" Eva said. "From her mother," Mrs. Rosen said. "In Warsaw." "Who learned it from hers?" Eva looked at the old woman in her chair near the stove, who had not looked up once during this conversation. She thought about how long that knowledge had been traveling, through how many kitchens, across how many winters, all the way from Warsaw to a tenement on Hester Street, carrying itself inside a woman who was now 81 years old and would not look up when the building manager came in. She learned 3 other things that morning. From Mrs. Ferrara, when the oven was hot from baking, leave the oven door cracked after the fire was banked. The heat stored in the cast iron would release slowly into the room for hours rather than staying trapped in the metal. The Ferraras had been doing this for 3 years. Eva had walked past their door 3 times a week for 3 years. From Mr. Metzger, through a note she found under her door that evening, written in his careful Yiddish, a pot of water simmering at the lowest possible heat on the back of the stove put moisture into the air. And moist air held warmth better than dry air. He had learned this from his wife. His wife had been dead for 9 years. From Miriam Cohen. In the hallway, newspaper taped against the inside of the glass created a layer of still air between the room and the cold pane. And still air did not conduct heat the way glass did. She had learned it at the night school, where someone had explained the physics of insulation in a way she had kept and used. Eva stood in the hallway after talking to Miriam and thought about what she had just learned. 4 pieces of knowledge. All of them real. All of them working. None of them known to the whole building. The Rosens had been loading the coal that way for years and had not told the Ferraras. The Ferraras had been cracking the oven door for 3 years and had not told the Zielinskis. Mr. Metzger had been simmering the pot since his wife died and had told no one until today, when he had written it in a note and pushed it under Eva's door. These things lived in separate apartments and had never met each other. She thought about what that meant. She had the keys to every door. She walked every hallway every week. She was the person with the information about Harrington and the boiler and the timely fashion. And it had not occurred to her, in 6 years, to ask what the people behind those doors knew that she did not know. She went back to her apartment. She took a fresh sheet from the ledger and wrote the names of each apartment. Next to each name, she wrote what she now knew about how that family was managing the cold. Rosen coal loading method, 15% more efficient. Ferrara oven door after baking, hours of additional heat at no cost. Metzger simmering pot, moisture holds warmth. Cohen newspaper on windows. Still air layer. She looked at the list. Then she wrote below it. These things live in separate apartments and have never met. They should meet. I have the keys. I walk the hallways. I am the person who can carry this from door to door. I have not been doing that. I am going to start. She put on her coat. She spent the next 2 hours going from door to door, not to collect rent, and not to deliver bad news about the boiler. She went to show Mrs. Zielinska what Mrs. Rosen's mother did with the coal. She went to tell the Ferraras about the simmering pot. She went to give Herschel and Dovid the information about the newspaper on the windows. At each door she knocked with her 3 knocks and said what she came to say and listened to what came back. When she got to Mr. Metzger, she thanked him for the note and told him about Mrs. Rosen's coal loading method, which he had not known. He listened carefully. Then he picked up the coal bucket and tried it himself. His old shoemaker's hands, placing the pieces at the angles she described. He watched the fire for 2 minutes. Good, he said. Just that. One word. But it was the word he used when something was correct. And coming from Mr. Metzger, it was not a small thing. Eva went back upstairs. Lena came home from school at 3:30 and found her mother at the kitchen table with the stove loaded in a new configuration and a pot of water simmering on the back burner and newspaper covering the lower half of both windows. Lena looked at all of this. What happened? She said. I learned some things. Eva said. From who? From the people in the building? Eva said. Lena looked at the newspaper on the windows. Then she looked at the stove. The configuration of coal, visible through the open door. Can you show me how to do that? She said. Eva looked at her daughter. Yes, she said. Come here. She showed her. Lena tried it twice. getting the feel of the placement. When she had it, she straightened up and looked at the fire the way she looked at things she had decided to keep. Better, she said. Better. Eva agreed. Outside the window, Hester Street was doing what it did at 4 in the afternoon in December. Getting darker, faster than you were ready for it to get dark. The vendors wrapping up their carts. The workers coming home. From the building across the street, thin lines of coal smoke rose from a dozen chimneys into the gray sky. Eva stood at the stove with her daughter and felt the room respond to the correctly loaded coal. The steadier heat, the more even draw, 15% more efficient. It was not the boiler. It was not what she had asked for from Harrington. It was what she had found in the building she had been walking through for 6 years without asking what the people inside it knew. She went to the ledger and wrote the date. Then she wrote in the margin, "What I have been carrying between apartments, rent notices, boiler news, lock repairs. What I have not been carrying anything I learned from one apartment that might help another. The Rosen coal method, the Ferrara oven door, the Cohen window, the Metzger pot. These things live in separate rooms. They have been there the whole time. I have been the person with the keys, and I have been walking past all of it." She closed the ledger. She went to the end of the table for dinner. The fire in the stove burned the way a correctly loaded fire burned, steadily and with intention. And the room was warmer than it had been yesterday at this hour. And that was something. And she held it the way you held the things that were small but real, which was carefully, because small and real was what you had. He arrived on a Thursday. Eva heard him before she saw him, which was how she knew it was him, and not a tradesman or a neighbor. She heard the particular sound of good shoes on the front steps, the deliberate weight of a man who was accustomed to having his footsteps heard, and then the knock at the street door, 3 times, with the knuckle rather than the flat of the hand, which was the knock of a man who knocked on doors as a formality rather than a request. She opened the door. Edwin Harrington was 52 years old, medium height, with the build of a man who had been sturdy in his youth and had moved from sturdy toward solid in the years since without noticing the transition. He wore a wool overcoat, dark gray, well cut, with a collar that sat properly. His shoes were leather, polished, with a thin coating of street slush on the toe that appeared to mildly offend him. He carried a leather case, flat, the kind used for documents. He looked at Eva. "Mrs. Stern," he said. "I happened to be in the area." Eva had seen Harrington 4 times in 14 months. 3 of those times he had come to collect the rent in person rather than wait for her money order. Once he had come to look at a water stain on the 3rd floor ceiling that she had written to him about twice. He had agreed it needed attention and had left, and the stain was still there. He had never, in 14 months, happened to be in the area. She understood this visit had been prompted by her letters, by the word urgent, and by the specific numbers she had given him. The temperatures, and the days, and the number of people. She also understood he had decided to frame the visit as informal, as a matter of passing by, which she noted and set aside. "Mr. Harrington," she said. "Come in." He came into the entry hall and looked around with the look of a man confirming that things were as he expected them to be. The entry hall was clean. She kept it clean. The floor was swept and the walls were intact, and the light from the street window was working. "The boiler," he said. "In the basement," Eva said. "I can show you. In a moment." He was looking at the door to the first-floor apartments. "The tenants. Are they managing?" "They are managing," Eva said. "It is the 12th of December. The boiler has been out since the 3rd. 9 days without building heat. Mr. Harrington, the families are burning their own coal for warmth. That is an additional cost they did not anticipate." Harrington looked at her with the look of a man receiving information and deciding what to do with it, holding it at arm's length while he calculated. "I see," he said. "One of the residents," Eva said, "is 8 months pregnant. Another is 71 years old and living alone. A third has been ill with a fever that returns when the temperature in his room drops." She said these things in the same tone she used to tell him about the stain on the third-floor ceiling. Not accusing, informing. She had decided that accusing would give him something to push against, and informing would give him nothing to push against, except the facts themselves, which were not interested in being pushed. Harrington looked at the floor, not with guilt, with the look of a man who is calculating. "Show me the boiler," he said. They went downstairs. The basement was a low-ceilinged room that ran under the full footprint of the building. The coal cellar was at the back, and the boiler room was at the front, where the pipes ran up through the building's core. Eva carried a lantern. The basement was not wired for electricity. The boiler sat in the center of the boiler room, cold and self-important, connected to a network of pipes that were currently empty of steam and silent. Harrington stood in front of it with his hands in his overcoat pockets and looked at it for a long time. Eva stood behind him with the lantern and let him look. He reached out and touched one of the pipes, pulled his hand back immediately from the cold of it. "When did it last run?" he said. "The 3rd of December. It stopped sometime in the night, and before that it was running. It was running, but not correctly." Eva said, "I wrote to you about the sound in November." He said nothing to this. He walked around the boiler, looking at it from different sides. "What do you think is wrong with it?" he said. "I think it needs to be looked at by someone who knows boilers," Eva said. "I know someone who may be able to do that. A repairman on Delancey Street. His name is Adelman." Harrington looked at her over his shoulder. "One of the residents found him," Eva said. "She says he repairs this type of boiler." Harrington's expression moved through something she watched without commenting on. He had come expecting to find a situation that was less serious than her letters suggested, because in his experience, situations described by building managers were usually less serious than described. Managers used urgency to prompt action, and the urgency was often rhetorical rather than actual. He was looking at a boiler that had been cold for 9 days, in a building with 43 people in it. "This Adelman," he said. "Do you know his rates?" "I don't," Eva said, "but I have the address." Harrington was quiet for a moment. He walked to the coal cellar and looked at what was there. 210 pounds of building coal. The seasonal supply delivered in October. Now sitting in the dark, doing nothing, because the boiler it was meant for was not running. He looked at the pile for a long time. "That should last through the end of the month," he said. For the boiler, Eva said carefully. If the boiler were running, yes, he said. The boiler is not running, she said. This coal is not heating the building. Harrington looked at the coal pile and then at the boiler room and then at Eva, and she watched him perform the arithmetic she had performed 9 days ago. I see, he said. They went back upstairs. In the entry hall, Harrington stood with his leather case and his good coat. Eva stood near the door with the lantern. I'll contact Adelman, he said, or a man I know who does this kind of work. I'll have someone look at it. When? Eva said. He looked at her. It was the same question Marta Zielinska had asked. The same question Lena had asked. The question that had only one useful answer, and all the other answers were variations on, I don't know, dressed in more polite clothing. Before Christmas, he said. Eva kept her expression where it was. It is the 12th of December, she said. I know what day it is. Mrs. Stern, before Christmas is 13 days, she said. Harrington looked at her with the look of a man who was not accustomed to being counted at. Then he looked away. At the wall, at the floor, at the crack in the baseboard she had been meaning to fill. I'll send someone this week, he said. She held that. This week was not a date. This week was Monday through Sunday, and today was Thursday. I would appreciate that, Eva said. Harrington put on his hat. He looked around the entry hall one more time. The proprietary look of a man surveying something he owned. Then he looked at Eva. You've done well keeping things together, Mrs. Stern, he said. This kind of situation is difficult. Eva stood in the entry hall with the lantern in her hand and looked at the back of his good coat. Yes, she said. It is. He went out. She stood in the entry hall for a moment, after the door closed, in the silence that followed Harrington's departures, which was the silence of a space that had been occupied by a certain kind of authority and was now empty of it again. She went upstairs. Lena was at the table doing arithmetic for school. She looked up when Eva came in. Was that Mr. Harrington? She said. Yes, Eva said. What did he say? Eva took off her coat and hung it on the hook. She went to the stove and checked the fire, which was doing what she had set it to do, burning at the new configuration, steady and directed. He said he would send someone this week, she said. Lena looked up from her arithmetic. This week is almost over, she said. I know, Thursday and Friday, and then it is the weekend. I know. Lena. Her daughter looked at her for a moment, deciding something. Then she looked back at her arithmetic. Okay, she said, in the tone she used when she had registered a fact and decided to leave it where it was. Eva sat at the table and opened the ledger. She wrote the date and the fact of the visit. She wrote what Harrington had said. Then she opened the margin. He came, she wrote. He looked at the boiler. He said this week. She looked at those 3 sentences. Then she wrote, he has good shoes. The building has 43 people. These 2 facts are not in conversation with each other. They should be. She looked at the coal cellar number she had written in the margin 2 days ago. 210 pounds. Sitting in the basement, doing nothing. She picked up her pen. She wrote a letter to Harrington about the coal cellar. Not about the boiler. About the coal that was in the cellar. His coal. Building coal. sitting there, while families bought their own. She asked whether it would be possible, while the boiler was being repaired, for the building's coal to be made available to residents who needed it as a temporary measure. She signed it. She looked at the letter. Then she sealed it and put it with the outgoing mail and went to make dinner. By the third week of December, the building had organized itself in ways that no one had planned and no one had announced. Eva noticed it the way she noticed most things, through the particular attention of a woman who moved in and out of every part of the building every day and had learned to read it the way you read a text you had studied, long enough to see what was between the sentences. It started with the coal cellar. Harrington had not replied to her letter about the coal. The someone he had promised to send this week had not appeared by Friday evening. And Friday became Saturday. And Saturday became Sunday. And on Sunday evening, Eva went down to the coal cellar and looked at the 210 pounds sitting there in the cold, and made a decision that she spent 3 hours making and 30 seconds executing. She went to the first floor. She knocked on Mr. Metzger's door. He opened it in his coat and his hat, and the expression of a man who expected nothing from a Sunday evening knock except inconvenience. "Mr. Metzger," Eva said, "I have coal in the cellar. Building coal. Mr. Harrington's coal. Technically, the boiler cannot use it because the boiler is not running. I am going to make it available to people in the building who need it. I will keep a record of who takes what. I will square it with Harrington later." Mr. Metzger looked at her for a long moment. "That is not exactly your coal to give," he said. "No," Eva said. "It is not exactly my coal to give." He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the hallway was cold, and the building had been without boiler heat for 16 days. And they both knew what was in the coal cellar, and they both knew what was happening in every apartment above them. "How much?" he said. "How much do you need?" she said. He told her. She wrote it in the ledger. She went to every apartment that evening. She knocked on every door and said what she had said to Mr. Metzger, and she got various versions of the same response, which was surprise, then calculation, then a number. She wrote every number down. She carried the coal up in buckets, trip after trip, from the cellar to each floor, because the building had 43 people in it, and she had 2 arms and a ledger and a decision she had made. By the time she was done, it was past 10, and the coal cellar was 140 pounds lighter, and the building was, in every apartment she had visited, at least 10 degrees warmer than it had been that morning. She went upstairs and wrote a letter to Harrington, explaining exactly what she had done and why, and how much coal she had distributed to whom, and what she planned to charge against the building account to cover it. She sealed it and put it with the outgoing mail. Then she opened the ledger and wrote in the margin, "Distributed 140 pounds of building coal to 9 apartments on the evening of December 15th. Kept a record. Will square with Harrington. If this was wrong, I will explain it. I am not sure it was wrong." That was the coal. What followed from the coal was less easy to describe, but more important to understand. When Eva had gone to each door on Sunday evening, she had spent a few minutes in each apartment. Not long, but enough to exchange the information she had been gathering since she learned about the coal loading and the door cloth and the newspaper on the windows. She told the Ferraras about the simmering pot from Mr. Metzger. She told Mr. Metzger about the oven door from the Ferraras. She told David about the coal loading from the Rosens. She told Mrs. Zielinska that the Ferrara kitchen was warmer than most rooms in the building in the morning, and that Mrs. Ferrara had said, through the boy, that she was welcome to come on the coldest days. That last piece had taken the most courage to deliver, not because of anything difficult in the saying of it, but because it required Eva to position herself as someone who carried things between people, rather than someone who stood at the center and directed. She was not sure, until she said it, whether she was the right person to carry that particular thing. Mrs. Zielinska had listened without expression. Then she said, in her careful English, "I will think about it." 2 days later, Eva passed the Ferrara door in the morning and heard, distinctly, Mrs. Zielinska's voice, speaking Polish, that Mrs. Ferrara could not understand, and Mrs. Ferrara responding in Italian that Mrs. Zielinska could not understand. And between these two conversations, the steady rhythm of knitting needles, she did not knock. She went upstairs. This was the kind of thing that was happening in the building in the 3rd week of December that was not planned and not announced. The Rosen children began spending an hour after school with Miriam Cohen in 4B. Not because anyone arranged it, but because the 4th floor was warmer than the 5th, and Miriam's apartment was the warmest room Miriam knew how to make. The children had figured this out, and Miriam had opened the door. Mrs. Kaufman began sending leftover soup down to Mr. Metzger on the evenings when she made more than the family needed, which was most evenings, because Mrs. Kaufman cooked for 8 people on instinct, regardless of how many she was currently feeding. Mr. Metzger, who had been eating bread and hard cheese for dinner since his wife died 9 years ago, received the soup without comment and returned the pot clean. Eva observed all of this from the hallways and the stairwells and the doors. She observed, and she wrote it down. Not in the accounting columns, which were for coal and rent and degrees. In the margin, where she wrote the things that had no column. Zielinska, in the Ferrara kitchen, Tuesday morning. She wrote, Rosen children with Cohen. Kaufmann soup to Metzger. The building is doing something I did not plan. I am not sure whether to say that I did plan it, or whether to say that it planned itself. Probably the second one is more accurate. She looked at that. Then she went to see how Herschel was. Herschel was better. Not completely better, but the fever had come down on Saturday and stayed down through Sunday, and this was Monday, and it was still down. David had hung the gray blanket from Eva over the north window, which was not what blankets were for, but was exactly what the blanket was now for. And the room was 4 degrees warmer than it had been the week before. Eva stood in the doorway of the back room and looked at Herschel, who was sitting up in bed with his coat on and a cup of something hot in his hands. His face had the particular quality of a man who had been sick enough to appreciate not being sick. Better, she said. Better, he said, in Yiddish. She looked at the room, the blanket on the window, the door cloth along the bottom of the apartment door, which David had installed after she told them about the Ferraras, the simmering pot on the stove, visible through the open doorway, which David had started keeping going after she told them about Mr. Metzger's wife's method, 4 degrees warmer. Not because Harrington had sent anyone, not because the boiler was running, because the building had been doing what buildings full of people did when people actually talked to each other across their floors and doorways, which was pool what they knew. Harrington is sending someone, Eva said. For the boiler? Herschel looked at her. His expression was the expression of a man who had been old enough, long enough, to know the difference between something that would happen and something that might happen. When he sends someone, Herschel said. Tell me. I want to watch. Eva almost smiled. She went back to the hallway. On the landing between the 4th and 5th floors, she stopped and stood for a moment in the cold of the stairwell. The coldest space in the building. Neither inside an apartment nor outside in the weather. She thought about the building as it had been 2 weeks ago and as it was now. 2 weeks ago, the building had been 11 separate apartments with 11 separate coal budgets and 11 separate approaches to staying warm. All of them reasonable. None of them in conversation with the others. The Rosens with their coal loading. The Ferraras with their oven door. Miriam with her newspaper windows. Mr. Metzger with his simmering pot and his winter wisdom from a city she had never seen. All of that knowledge had been in the building for years. In some cases, the Ferraras had been doing the oven door for 3 years. Mrs. Rosen's mother had been loading the coal that way her whole life. Eva had lived in this building for 6 years and had not known any of it. She thought about what Harrington had said, "You've done well keeping things together." She thought about what keeping things together had looked like for 14 months, which was mostly keeping things separate in their orderly rows in the ledger. Each apartment, a line item. Each month, a page. Each person, a number in a column that ran from top to bottom without connecting to any other column. The building had connected the columns. Not her. The building. The cold and the closed door and the long December and the particular pressure that settled over people when the thing they expected to be there was not there and they had to figure something else out. She went back upstairs. Lena was at the stove in the posture she had adopted since Eva showed her the coal-loading method. Checking her work, making sure it was right. "I loaded it the Rosen way," Lena said. "Check it." Eva looked at the stove. The configuration was correct. Larger pieces at the back, smaller at the front. The angle of each piece deliberate. "You did it right," Eva said. Lena nodded with the contained satisfaction she had when she had learned something she intended to keep. Eva sat at the table and opened the ledger. She wrote the date. She wrote the coal remaining and the temperature estimate and the boiler status, which was the same as it had been since December 3rd. Then she turned to the margin. 3rd week of December. She wrote, "Boiler still out. Harrington still pending. The building is warmer than it should be by the arithmetic. Something is adding up that I am not counting." She paused. Then she wrote, "I think it is the people." She looked at that last sentence for a long time. Then she wrote below it, "Harrington keeps the ledger." Harrington owns the building, but the building knows things that Harrington's ledger does not have a column for. I have been keeping his ledger. I think I should also be keeping this other one. I think I have been. She closed the ledger. Outside the window, Hester Street was getting dark at 4 in the afternoon the way it did in December, without apology. The vendors wrapping up their carts, the workers coming home, their breath visible in the cold, moving through the early dark with the purposeful speed of people who had somewhere warm to go. Eva watched them from the window. Then she went to help Lena set the table. The 15 cents had been in the ledger since November. Eva looked at it every time she opened to the November page, which was often because the November page was where she had written the first coal estimates, and she referred to it when she updated the December numbers. The 15 cents sat in the column under Mr. Metzger's name with the notation outstanding, carry to December, and it had been sitting there long enough that she had stopped seeing it as a number and had started seeing it as a decision she had not made yet. On the morning of December 15th, she decided to make it. She went downstairs at 9, after Lena had gone to school, and after she had done the morning stove work. She knocked on the door of 1B with her 3 knocks and waited. Mr. Metzger opened the door. He was in his coat, as always. But this morning he was also in the expression of a man who had been expecting this visit and had spent time preparing for it. Not preparing an argument, preparing himself, which was a different thing. Mr. Metzger, Eva said. May I come in? He stepped back from the door. She came in. The apartment held fewer things than the other apartments. Not because he was neat in a deliberate way, but because he had arrived with little and had accumulated only what he needed. There was a workbench near the window where he did his repair work, with tools hung on the wall above it in a specific arrangement. There was a shelf with a few books and a photograph Eva had never looked at directly. There was the stove, and the chair near the stove, and the table where he ate. On the table there was a cup of tea. He had made 2 cups. The second one was at the place across from his chair. Eva sat down. The tea was hot. She wrapped her hands around it and said nothing for a moment. And he said nothing. And the apartment was quiet except for the stove, which was burning at the correct configuration now, the one she had shown him, and the fire sounded different from a correctly loaded stove. Steadier, a more even draw. The 15 cents. Eva said. Yes, he said. I need to talk to you about it. He looked at his tea. I know what I owe, he said. I have always known what I owe. I know that, Eva said. That is not what I want to talk about. He looked up at her. I want to talk about why it happened, she said. Not to ask you to explain yourself, because I think I already know. And if I know, then I should say so, instead of sitting here with the 15 cents between us like something neither of us has decided what to do with. Mr. Metzger looked at her with the measuring look he used for things he was deciding whether to trust. You chose coal, Eva said. In November, when you were 15 cents short, you chose coal over the rent difference. He was quiet. I think that was the right choice, she said. He set down his cup. It was the only choice, he said. A man who is dead from cold cannot pay his rent the following month. No, Eva said. He cannot. I have been cold before, Mr. Metzger said. Not cold like this building this month. Cold like Poland. Cold that did not apologize for itself and did not offer you a choice about whether to be in it. Cold that had a point of view. He picked up his cup again and looked at it. Here I can buy coal. There I sometimes could not. That is a different situation. But the arithmetic is the same. You spend what keeps you alive, and you find the rest later. Eva looked at him. He was 71 years old. He had come from Krakow at the age of 53, which was not the age at which people usually made the journey. She did not know why he had come at 53. She had never asked. She knew that his wife had died before he came, and that he had no children she knew of, and that he sent money orders to an address in Poland twice a year, which she knew because he had once asked her to write the address on the envelope when his hands were too stiff from the cold to write clearly. "I want to tell you something," Eva said, "about what I have been doing with the ledger." He waited. "I have been keeping 2 sets of numbers," she said. "The numbers Harrington expects, which are rent and expenses and the amounts sent to him each month, and other numbers, temperatures in each apartment, coal amounts, who is short, and by how much, and why." She paused. "Your 15 cents is in both ledgers. In Harrington's ledger it is outstanding rent. In my other ledger it is a cold decision that a man made correctly when he had to choose between 2 things that both mattered." "Mr. Metzger looked at her for a long time. "What does that mean?" he said. "Practically, it means I am carrying the 15 cents to January in Harrington's ledger," Eva said, "which I was already doing, and it means I am writing in my other ledger that you made the right call." He was quiet. Then he said, "Your husband used to knock on my door sometimes. Not for rent, just to knock." Eva held this. "He said he liked to know the building was settling right." Mr. Metzger said. That was the phrase he used. Settling right. He would walk the floors and knock on the doors and make sure things were as they should be. He looked at his tea. He was the kind of man who knew what a building needed. "Yes," Eva said. "He was. You are also that kind of person." Mr. Metzger said, "It is just taking you longer because you are also doing the part he did not have to do, which is figuring it out without anyone who figured it out before you." Eva sat with that. She thought about 14 months, and the letters, and the ledger, and the keys, and the coal she had carried up the stairs on Sunday evening, and the conversations she had been having with 11 doors for 3 weeks about a boiler that no one had fixed. "Mr. Metzger," she said, "I want to ask you something." "Ask," he said. "What do you know about boilers?" He looked at her. Then something in his face moved. Not quite a smile, more the preparation for one, the expression a face made when it was considering whether the situation deserved it. "I was a shoemaker," he said, "not a boiler man." "I know," Eva said, "but you have lived longer than anyone else in this building, and you have been paying attention to things for 71 years. I am not asking what a boiler mechanic would know. I am asking what you know." He looked at his hands, the knuckles large, the fingers slightly crooked from 50 years of work. "The boiler in this building is a fire tube boiler," he said. "Standard design for this size building. About 12 years old. The sound you described in November, the irregular sound, is most often one of 3 things." He held up a finger. "Sediment in the bottom of the water tank, which rattles when the water boils. Cheapest fix. Just flush the tank." A second finger. "A faulty pressure relief valve, which cycles irregularly, because it opens before the pressure is high enough to push the steam through the pipes properly. More expensive, but not catastrophic. A third finger. A cracked section in the fire tube, which means the fire's heat is not transferring correctly to the water. That is the expensive problem. Eva looked at him. How do you know this? She said. The building on Rivington Street, where I lived before this one, he said, also had a boiler problem. The mechanic who came explained what he was doing while he was doing it. I was there the whole time. When a man explains his work while he is working, and you listen, you learn what he knows. He looked at the wall. That boiler had the second problem. The valve cost $14 to fix. The landlord paid it in March. March, Eva said. They were cold, from November to March. He said. They managed? Eva was quiet for a moment. If I could get Harrington to send Adelman, she said. What should I ask him to check first? Mr. Metzger looked at her with the look of a man who had been asked to be useful and had decided to be useful. The valve? He said. Check the valve first. If it is the valve, it is a $14 problem. If Harrington knows, it is $14 and not $50. He may move faster. Eva wrote this in the ledger she had brought with her. Right there at the table. While the tea was still hot and the fire in his stove was burning, the way a correctly loaded fire burned, she wrote Metzger. Boiler knowledge. Check pressure relief valve first. $14, if that is the problem. Tell Harrington 14 before telling him 50. She looked at what she had written. Then she wrote below it. The 15 cents was not the point of this visit. The 15 cents was the reason I came. The boiler information is what the visit was actually for. I did not know that when I knocked on the door. She closed the ledger. She stood up. Mr. Metzger stood too. Not because he was showing her out, but because that was what he did when someone stood in his apartment. The old courtesy of a man who had been taught certain things, young enough that they had become structural. The 15 cents, Eva said, I am going to mark it paid. He looked at her. You gave me more than 15 cents worth of information this morning, she said. Consider it a trade. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression did the thing it sometimes did. The preparation for a smile that arrived at something just short of one but communicated the same thing. Your husband, he said, would have liked how you run this building. Eva put on her coat. He would have fixed the boiler by now. She said, Yes, Mr. Metzger said. He would have, but you will get it fixed, too. Just differently. She went to the door. Come back when you need to think out loud, he said. I am usually here. She went back into the hallway. She stood there for a moment, with the cold of the ground floor and the sound of the building around her. Then she went upstairs and wrote a new letter to Harrington. She wrote about the pressure relief valve. She wrote the number $14. She wrote Adelman's address on Delancey Street. And she wrote the question she had not yet put in any of her previous letters. The question she had been writing around for 3 weeks. Mr. Harrington, she wrote, I am writing to ask you directly. Will you authorize the repair of this boiler before the end of this week? I am not asking whether it will be repaired. I am asking whether you will authorize it. If the answer is yes, I will contact Mr. Adelman and arrange the inspection. If the answer is no, I would like to know that too. The building needs a specific answer, and I am the one who has to give it to them. She read the letter twice. Then she sealed it and put it with the mail. She went to the stove and stood near it for a moment, her hands out to the warmth of the correctly loaded fire. $14. 3 weeks of cold for the price of $14. Possibly less. She stood at the stove and thought about that number until she felt the warmth in her hands. And then she picked up the ledger and went to do the rest of the morning's work. On the morning of December 17th, Eva woke up to the smell of bread. Not her bread. The bread smell was coming from below. And it was real bread. The smell of a working oven at full temperature. The bread and char smell that meant someone had been baking since before 5 in the morning. She lay in bed and tracked the smell downward through the building. Second floor. The Ferrara apartment. She dressed and went downstairs. She knocked on the Ferrara door. Mrs. Ferrara opened it with flour on her hands and the look of a woman who had been working since 4 and was not surprised to see anyone at any hour, because when you had been awake since 4, the rest of the world came to you. Mrs. Stern, she said. Then something in Italian that the boy, appearing behind his mother, translated as, "Come in. It is warm." Eva came in. It was warm. The Ferrara kitchen was the warmest space Eva had been in since the boiler went out. Warmer than her own apartment at the height of the afternoon. Warmer than the Rosen apartment, with its coal loading and its extra people and its old woman stationed at the stove. The warmth was a physical fact, something you walked into rather than noticed gradually. The warmth of a room where a large cast-iron oven had been burning at full temperature for 3 hours. All 6 Ferraras were awake. The 2 older children were at the table with books. The 2 younger ones were near the oven. Giorgio, the cousin, was in the corner, mending something. Mrs. Ferrara went back to the bread she had not yet put in, shaping it with her hands in the quick, certain movements of someone performing a task that had become reflex. Eva sat at the table. The boy brought her coffee. Not real coffee, but the barley coffee. They all drank because it was cheaper, and did the same work of being hot and dark, and requiring a cup. She wrapped her hands around it. "How long have you been baking this way?" Eva said. "In the morning," the boy asked his mother. His mother answered. "She says always," the boy said. In Naples, her mother baked in the morning. Her grandmother too. The bread and the heat are the same thing. Eva looked at Mrs. Ferrara, who was putting the shaped loaves into the oven, with the movements of someone performing a task that had gone past habit into something more like grammar, the fundamental structure through which she organized the morning. Mrs. Ferrara had figured something out that Eva had not known to ask about. A full oven load of bread required the oven to run at high temperature for 2 hours. But the oven then held that heat for 4 to 6 hours after the fire was banked. The heat released from the cast iron warmed the kitchen during those hours with no additional coal. The bread was food. The heat from baking it was warmth. The coal used to bake the bread was doing 2 jobs at once. This was the arithmetic that Mrs. Ferrara had been doing every cold morning for however many winters she had been managing a kitchen that was also a heating system. Eva did not know how many winters that was. She knew only that the knowledge was real because she could feel it in the temperature of the room. "Tell her," Eva said to the boy, "that I have been learning from her without knowing it. The boy told her. Mrs. Ferrara listened, and then looked at Eva and said something. She says, "You are welcome in her kitchen whenever it is cold." The boy said. She says, "It is always warm in the morning." Eva sat with her barley coffee and the warmth of the Ferrara kitchen and let herself be warm for the first time in 2 weeks without calculating the coal cost of being warm. She looked around the room. She thought about what else had come across various oceans to this building. What knowledge had traveled in the minds and hands and habits of people who had arrived with little else and had carried what could not be taken away. Mr. Metzger's boiler knowledge from Poland. Mrs. Rosen's mother's stove, loading from Warsaw. The Ferrara kitchen wisdom from Naples. Miriam's newspaper windows from a night school classroom where someone had explained the physics of still air in a way she had kept and used. The knowledge the building contained was older than the building. It had been here before she arrived and would be here after she left, and it had been here the whole time she had been managing the building without asking the right questions. She finished her coffee. Mrs. Ferrara pressed a small loaf into her hands as she stood to go. Warm from the oven. And Eva looked at it for a moment and thought about what to say. "Tell her I will bring something back," she said to the boy. The boy told her. Mrs. Ferrara waved her hand in the Italian gesture that meant, "Do not worry about it," but also meant she had heard and noted it. Eva went back upstairs. Lena was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with bread and tea she had made herself. "I want to show you something tomorrow morning," Eva said. Lena looked up. "What?" "The warmest place in the building," Eva said. "The Ferrara kitchen. Mrs. Ferrara bakes in the morning, and the oven heats the whole room." Lena thought about this with the look she had when connecting things she had been separately holding. "That is why it always smells like bread down there in the morning," she said. "Yes," Eva said. "I thought she just liked baking," Lena said. "She does like baking," Eva said. "And it keeps the room warm." "Both things are true at the same time," Lena nodded slowly. "Can I bring my reading?" she said. "Yes," Eva said. "Bring your reading." Eva sat at the table and opened the ledger. She wrote the date and the coal count and the temperature estimate. Then she turned to the margin. She wrote Ferrara kitchen. The bread and the heat are the same thing. Her mother knew this. Her grandmother knew this. It came across the ocean with them the way things come when people cannot bring everything and must choose what is worth the carrying. She brought this. She stopped writing and looked at what she had written. Then she wrote one more line. "I have been in this building for 6 years. I have been walking past this kitchen for 6 years. I did not know what was in it until a broken boiler in December made me stop and knock on the door." She closed the ledger. She went to the window and looked at Hester Street in the morning. The vendors setting up, the breath of the crowd visible in the cold, the thin lines of coal smoke rising from every chimney on the block. From downstairs she could still smell the bread. She stood at the window and let the smell come up through the floors of the building and thought about what it meant to live above something for 6 years without knowing what it was. Then she turned from the window and went to see what the stove needed. The thermometer said 103. Eva had borrowed it from Miriam Cohen at 7 in the morning, because Miriam was the only person in the building who owned one. having bought it in September when the school asked all the teachers to have one at home in case a child became ill during a lesson. Miriam had handed it to Eva without questions, which was the right thing to do. When someone knocked on your door at 7 in the morning with the specific look Eva had, 103 degrees. Eva stood in the doorway of Lena's room with the thermometer in her hand and looked at her daughter. Lena was in bed with her coat over the blankets, which was how she had been sleeping since the boiler went out, and her face against the pillow had the particular color of a face that had been running a high temperature through the night. Eva recognized this color. She had seen it twice before, once when Lena was 4 and once when she was 6. At both times Eva had sat next to the bed and counted the degrees and made the calculations that mothers made when a child was sick. The calculations were, how high is the fever? How long has it been this high? Is it going up or coming down? What is the sound of the cough? The fever was 103. It had been building since the previous afternoon. When Lena came home from school quieter than usual and went directly to bed without being asked, which was the first sign, because Lena did not go to bed willingly under ordinary circumstances. It had been building through the night while Eva sat next to the bed and put cold cloths on her forehead and changed them when they warmed. It had been building in a cold room. This was the fact underneath all the other facts. The room was 36 degrees when Eva had checked at 3 in the morning. She had put every piece of coal she had onto the stove at midnight. The conservation calculation gone, because her daughter had a fever of 103 in a 36-degree room, and conservation was not the relevant arithmetic. By 3 in the morning the room was 41 degrees. By 7 it was 38. The coal burned through, the stove running on the last of the coals. Lena opened her eyes. "Mama," she said. Her voice had the texture of a voice that had been coughing in the night. "I'm here," Eva said. "How bad is it?" Eva looked at the thermometer. She thought about what to say. Lena was 9 years old and had her mother's way of asking questions that were actually requests for accurate information. 103, Eva said. Lena processed this. "Is that bad?" "It is high," Eva said. "It has been higher before, and you came through it." This was true. At 4 years old, Lena had run 104 for 2 days and come through it with nothing lasting. The direction of the number mattered as much as the number itself. "The room is cold," Lena said. "I know." The stove went out. "I am going to start it again," Eva said. She went to the kitchen. She looked in the coal bucket. 4 pieces left. Small ones. The pieces she had been saving because they were too small to bank a night fire on. She put all 4 on the grate with newspaper and kindling and got the fire going. 4 small pieces of coal in a cold stove in a cold room would take the room from 38 degrees to approximately 42 degrees in 1 hour. She needed more coal. She looked at the clock. 7:15. Petrovich opened at 7. She could be there and back in 30 minutes. She had 23 cents in the tin on the shelf. 23 cents would buy 15 pounds at the going rate. 15 pounds would last 1 day at the rate she needed to run the stove to keep a sick child warm in a cold room with thin walls. She stood in the kitchen with the 23 cents in her hand, and the arithmetic came out the same way it had been coming out for 3 weeks, which was not enough. There was a knock at the door. Eva opened it. Miriam Cohen was standing in the hallway in her school coat, her bag over her shoulder, already dressed to leave for the day. She looked at Eva and then into the apartment, and she did not need to be told anything because she had heard the coughing through the walls since midnight. "How high?" Miriam said. 103. Eva said. Miriam reached into her bag and brought out a small glass bottle. Brown, the kind the pharmacist used for preparations. "It is not medicine from a doctor," she said. "It is from Mrs. Greenberg on Rivington Street, who makes things for coughs. Honey and ginger, and something else she would not tell me. It helped my throat last winter." Eva looked at the bottle. "I was saving it," Miriam said, "in case the school children had a bad cough season. But it is more useful here." Eva took the bottle. She looked at Miriam Cohen in her school coat with her bag over her shoulder, 24 years old, who had found the boiler repairman on Delancey Street and called Harrington's office from the school telephone and bought a thermometer in September, and was now standing in the hallway at 7:15 in the morning, handing over something she had been saving. "There is a doctor who comes to Henry Street Settlement on Tuesday and Thursday mornings," Miriam said. "Dr. Feldman. He sees people without charge. Today is Tuesday." Henry Street Settlement was 6 blocks north and 1 block east. "Thank you," Eva said. Miriam went down the stairs. Eva closed the door and stood in the apartment with the bottle in her hand. She went to Lena. She gave her the honey and ginger preparation, a small spoonful, and watched her swallow it. Lena made a face because ginger was strong and then settled back against the pillow. "It smells like Mrs. Greenberg on Rivington Street," Lena said. "You know Mrs. Greenberg." "Everyone knows Mrs. Greenberg," Lena said. "She was at the market last summer. She smelled like this." She looked at the bottle. "Where did you get it?" "Miriam," Eva said. Lena was quiet for a moment. "She heard me coughing," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Eva said. Lena thought about this. "The walls in this building are very thin," she said. "Yes," Eva said. "Usually that seems bad," Lena said. "Right now, it seems different." Eva went to the stove and checked the fire. The 4 small pieces of coal were burning at the correct configuration, and the room temperature was rising slowly. She put the kettle on because hot water was useful. She needed more coal. She had 23 cents. 30 pounds was what 23 cents could buy at the going rate, which was 45 cents. She was 22 cents short. She thought about Petrowicz and the running account she had started. She thought about what it meant to keep adding to that account. She went downstairs. She knocked on the door of 1A. Mrs. Rosen opened it. "Lena has a fever," Eva said. 103. "I need to go to the coal supplier. I will be 40 minutes. Can someone check on her?" Mrs. Rosen did not consult anyone and did not pause. "Ruth," she called into the apartment, using the name of the 14-year-old who appeared in the doorway with a book in her hand. "Go upstairs and sit with Mrs. Stern's Lena. She is sick. Stay until her mother comes back." Ruth looked at Eva. Then she put the book down on the chair nearest the stove and went to get her coat. "Go." Mrs. Rosen said to Eva. Eva went. She walked to Canal Street at the pace she used when she needed to be fast, but did not want to appear to be in an emergency. The pace she had developed for situations that did not benefit from the appearance of panic. She bought £30 from Petrowick's on the account. He wrote it down without comment, and she said she would bring what she owed on Friday, and he nodded, and she picked up the bag and left. She walked back at the same pace. Ruth was in the bedroom chair when Eva came in, reading aloud from the book she had brought. Something in Yiddish. Lena was in the bed with her eyes open, listening. When Eva appeared in the doorway, both of them looked up. She told me a story, Lena said. I read from the book, Ruth said. She seemed like she wanted to hear something. Thank you, Eva said. Ruth went back downstairs. Eva loaded the coal into the bucket and put the right amount on the stove and sat down in the chair next to Lena's bed. She put her hand on her daughter's forehead. Still hot. The same? She sat. This was the part of being a parent that no one told you in advance was the hardest part, which was the sitting. The doing was manageable, because doing was a problem with an action attached to it. The sitting was the part where there was no action to attach. Only the waiting, the monitoring, the counting of degrees. She counted. She thought about Henry Street settlement and Dr. Feldman and what Miriam had said about Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She looked at the clock. 8:45. She thought about what the fever needed to do between now and noon to make the decision for her. At 10:30 she took the temperature again. 102.5. She sat with that number. 102.5 was lower than 103. Half a degree was a small movement, but it was movement in the right direction. A fever going down was a different fever from a fever going up, even when the two numbers were close. She wrote in the ledger, sitting in the bedroom chair, with the ledger on her knee. December 19th. Lena. Fever 103 at 7 a.m. 102.5 at 10:30. Miriam Cohen. 2 am knock on the door. She stopped writing and looked at what she had written. The knock on the door, at 2 in the morning, was in the ledger now, next to the temperature of her daughter's fever, next to the time, next to the date. It belonged there, she decided, in the same record as the coal and the rent and the degrees. At noon, the temperature was 101.8. Eva sat with the thermometer in her hand and looked at the number for a long time. Then she put the thermometer down and went to make soup from what she had, which was not much, but was enough. Broth from a bone she had been saving. 1 potato, the last of the onion, a little sage from a bundle Mrs. Kaufman had sent down the previous week. She stood at the stove and made the soup and listened to the fire and listened to the building and listened through the wall to Lena's breathing. Lena's breathing was the sound she had been listening for since the previous night. It was steady. At 1 in the afternoon she brought the soup in, and Lena ate half of it sitting up, which was enough to tell Eva what she needed to know. Because a child who ate soup sitting up was a child whose body was working the way bodies worked when they were on the right side of a fever. It tastes like Mrs. Kaufman's soup, Lena said. The sage is hers, Eva said. Lena looked at the bowl. We should give her something back, she said. For the sage, what would you give her? Eva said. Lena thought. I could help with the baby. she said. When it comes. In January. I am good with babies. Eva looked at her daughter, who was 9 years old, with a fever of 101.8, sitting up in bed in a cold room, drinking soup made from someone else's sage, thinking about what she could give back. Yes, Eva said. I think that is right. She wrote in the margin that evening, after Lena was asleep and the fever was at 101 and the coal was correctly loaded and the room was at 43 degrees, the warmest it had been since the boiler went out, Miriam at 2 in the morning, Mrs. Rosen's Ruth, reading aloud, Petrowitz, and the account, Mrs. Kaufman's saga. Lena, what can we give back? She paused. Then she wrote, I have been writing the numbers in this building for 3 weeks. I have not been writing what the numbers are actually made of. She looked at that sentence. Then she wrote, they are made of this. On the morning of December 21st, the shortest day of the year, Eva went to buy coal and took Marta Zielinska with her. This had not been planned. Eva had knocked on the Zielinska door to tell Mrs. Zielinska that the invitation to the Ferrara kitchen was ongoing and did not require asking each time. While she was at the door, Marta appeared in her coat, already going to the Canal Street supplier, and asked if Eva wanted to walk together. Eva said yes. They went out into Hester Street on the shortest morning of the year, which was gray in the specific way of a morning that had not decided whether it intended to snow. The clouds low and even, and the color of old wool. Marta walked at the pace of a girl who had been walking to and from a factory on Green Street since she was 15, and had learned that the city responded to a direct line between where you were and where you were going. She did not look at the street the way newcomers looked at it. She looked at it the way you looked at a route you had walked enough times to stop seeing, except for the parts that changed. At the corner of Hester and Essex, Eva stopped. A man was standing in front of the pawn shop with a winter coat over his arm. A good coat. Heavy wool? The kind that went to the knee. He was looking at the door of the shop, and his face had the expression of someone who had made a decision and was standing in front of the consequence of it. Eva looked at the coat, and then at the man, and understood what she was seeing. He was trading the thing that kept him warm over days and weeks for the money to buy coal that would keep him warm over days. He was exchanging the long-term warmth for the immediate warmth, because the immediate warmth was the one that mattered right now. She had made versions of this calculation herself. She recognized it the way you recognize things you had done in a different form. Do you know him? Marta said. No. Eva said. I just know what he is doing. They walked on at the coal line, 4 people ahead of them. Eva saw the woman she had been noticing for the past 2 weeks. She knew this woman by sight from the building 2 doors down on Hester Street. Knew her by the canvas bag she always carried and the specific amount she always bought. She comes every day, Marta said, noticing Eva's look. Always the same. 40 pounds. 40 pounds every day. That was a family burning coal at a high rate, which meant either their building had no boiler, or their apartment was badly insulated, or they had many people, or all 3 of these things were true at once, which was the most common explanation. Eva looked at the woman's back in the line. She thought about the man with the coat. She thought about the 40 pounds every day. She thought about the coal line itself. This gathering every morning of people who were buying in small amounts at the retail rate rather than large amounts at the bulk rate, which meant they were doing the math the hard way, paying more per pound because they could not afford to pay less. She and Marta got their coal and walked back toward Hester Street. The factory, Eva said. After a moment, you mentioned the girls talk about things. Striking, Marta said. She said it directly, the way she said most things. Yes, it has been talked about for 2 years. The conditions. She shifted her coal bag to the other shoulder. Cold in winter. No air. Long hours. The machines are close together, and when one girl coughs, all the girls cough by the end of the week. And the exits, Eva said. She had heard Marta start to say something about exits the last time they talked, and stop. Marta looked at her. They lock them, she said, during the shift. So girls do not take breaks they are not supposed to take. So there is no stealing. She looked at the street ahead. A locked door is a different thing in winter than in summer. In summer it is uncomfortable. In winter, if there is a fire. Eva walked beside her and did not say anything, because there was nothing adequate to say. You should not work in a locked building, Eva said finally. No, Marta said. I should not, but I do, because the money goes to my mother and to the passage for my brother, who is still in Warsaw. She said this without self-pity, as a statement of the arithmetic of her life. When the arithmetic changes, I will do something different. Eva thought about the arithmetic. She thought about the building she managed, with its broken boiler, and its 11 apartments, and its 43 people, and its ledger with 2 sets of numbers. She thought about Harrington, who received $31 a month from this building and had spent none of it on a valve that might cost $14. She thought about the coal line, the same people every day, buying the same amounts, doing the same math. She thought about the man with the coat and the woman with the canvas bag, and Marta walking beside her with coal for her mother. The locked doors, Eva said. Does anyone outside the factory know? People know. Marta said. The settlement houses know. The newspapers know. Some of them. She paused. Knowing and doing something about the knowing are 2 different things. Eva thought about the letter she had written to Harrington about the pressure relief valve. She thought about the sentence she had written. I am asking whether you will authorize it. She thought about what it had felt like to write that sentence, to name the thing directly, to put the question where it could not be avoided. Yes, Eva said. They are 2 different things. They walked the rest of the way in quiet. At the door of 97 Hester Street, before they went in, Marta stopped. Mrs. Stern, she said. Can I ask you something? Yes, Eva said. Why do you stay in this building? You could manage a different building. A building with a working boiler. Eva looked at the door of the building. The door her husband had painted dark green 3 years ago, because he said buildings needed to look like someone cared about them. Lena's school is here, she said. Her friends are here. She paused. And the people in this building are people I know. By now, I know them the way you know people you have been cold with. That is a different kind of knowing from other kinds. Marta looked at the door. In Warsaw, she said. My mother used to say that you only really knew your neighbors after you had shared a winter with them. Your mother is right, Eva said. They went inside. Eva went upstairs. She checked on Lena, who was at the table doing school reading. The fever gone, the color back, the particular aliveness of a child who had been sick enough to notice being well. She put the coal in the bucket. She took off her coat. She sat at the table across from Lena and opened the ledger and wrote the date and the amount of coal and the temperature of the room. Then she turned to the margin. She wrote, "Shortest day of the year." The coal line, Marta, and the locked doors. You only know your neighbors after you have shared a winter with them. She looked at that last line. Then she wrote below it, "I am writing things in this ledger that Harrington will never read. That is not why I am writing them. I am writing them because they are the true account of what this winter costs, and what it is made of, and who is paying for it, and how." She closed the ledger. Outside the window, the light was already going, which it did in December without apology. The afternoon leaving at 3:30, as if it had somewhere else to be. Eva looked at it going. Then she looked at her daughter reading at the table, and the coal correctly loaded in the stove, and the room at 43 degrees, and the ledger closed on the table between them. "What are you reading?" she said. Lena looked up and told her. Eva listened. The light went. The stove kept the room. The candle on the table had been burning for 2 hours. Eva had lit it at 8 in the evening after Lena went to bed. The candle was beeswax. One of 3 she had been keeping in the drawer since October for the Sabbath and for emergencies. She had decided that tonight was a candle night. Not because of the holiday, which was not her holiday, but because it was the 24th of December, and Harrington had said before Christmas, and tomorrow was Christmas, and she needed to sit with what that meant. What it meant was, this tomorrow Harrington would have kept his word, or he would not have kept his word. The boiler had not been repaired. No one had come. No Adelman from Delancey Street. No man Harrington knew. No inspection. No assessment. No communication of any kind, beyond the letter that said he appreciated her diligence and that arrangements were being made. Before the end of the month. The month ended in 7 days. Eva sat at the kitchen table with the candle and the ledger and looked at what she had been looking at since December 3rd, which was the arithmetic of what the building had and what the building needed, and how long the distance between those two things could be managed before the managing stopped working. She opened the ledger to the coal page. 21 days without boiler heat. The numbers had been moving in one direction throughout, which was the direction of less. The Rosens were at approximately 5 days remaining. Mr. Metzger was at approximately 4 days, supplemented by the building's cellar coal she had distributed. The Ferraras, who burned their oven hot every morning and ran their stove efficiently, were in the best position at approximately 8 days. She looked at the number she had been not looking at for 3 days. She had 4 days of coal. At the current rate, if she reduced, 5 days, maybe 6. If she reduced further, she would be colder than she was, and Lena had just come through a fever and was not going to get cold again if Eva had any say in it. 4 days. The end of the month was 7 days away. The coal supply ran out before Harrington's deadline. She wrote it down December 24th. 21 days without boiler heat. Eva and Lena, 4 days of coal remaining. Rosen 5 days. Metzger, 4 days. The coal situation will resolve before Harrington's deadline resolves. She looked at those words. The candle was burning the way beeswax burned, slowly and evenly, the flames steady and warm-colored, and casting the kind of light that showed the table and the ledger and her own hands, but left the edges of the room in a soft dark. She thought about Harrington's phrase, "Before Christmas." She thought about what it meant to make a promise around a holiday that was not the holiday of the people being promised to. She thought about the 21 days she had been counting since he said it, each one going into the ledger, each one going into the margin. She opened to the page where she had written the coal cellar entry. She had written, "If this was wrong, I will explain it. I am not sure it was wrong." She was still not sure it was wrong. She turned to the margin on the current page. 21 days. She wrote, "I have been counting this winter in days since December 3rd, because days were the relevant unit. Each day had a coal number and a temperature number and a note about what happened in the building. I have not missed a day." She looked at the candle. She thought about all the things the 21 days had held. Mrs. Rosen's mother loading the coal the Warsaw way. Mr. Metzger and his wife's simmering pot. The Ferrara kitchen and the bread and the heat that were the same thing. Ruth Rosen reading aloud to Lena in the bedroom. Petrowitz and the running account. Mrs. Kaufmann's Sage. The blanket she had given David for Herschel, from the closet where it had been for 14 months. Miriam, at 2 in the morning, with a bottle from Mrs. Greenberg. Lena asking, "What can we give back?" She wrote 21 days. I have been treating what the building did as something that just happened. It did not just happen. Each person in this building made a decision, or many decisions, over these 21 days. Metzger chose coal over rent and did not apologize. Mrs. Ferrara opened her kitchen. Ruth Rosen put down her book. Miriam bought a thermometer in September in case it was useful later. These were decisions, small ones, made by people who had very little to spare. She stopped. She wrote, "The building has been doing its own accounting. I have been keeping Harrington's numbers. The building has been keeping different numbers. I am trying to learn to write them both down." She sat with that for a while. Then she turned to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top, December 24th, 1901. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Harrington, it is the 24th of December. The boiler at 97 Hester Street has been without heat for 21 days. I have documented every one of those days in the building's ledger, including the daily temperatures in each apartment, the coal usage of each family, the additional costs incurred by each tenant as a result of the boiler failure, and the total amount of building coal I distributed on December 15th, for which I am prepared to account in full." She wrote, "The coal supply for several apartments in this building will be exhausted within 4 days. This is before the end of the month deadline you named in your last letter. I am writing to inform you of this directly, so that you have accurate information." She wrote, "I am not writing to ask you to act. I am writing to tell you what is true. What you do with what is true is your decision. But the record of what is true will exist in the building's ledger regardless of what you decide. And I intend to keep it." She read this letter. It was different from the other letters. The other letters had asked and suggested and informed and requested. This letter told. She sat with it. Then she sealed it and addressed it and set it with the outgoing mail. She blew out the candle. She sat for a moment in the dark of the kitchen, with the smell of the candle smoke and the warmth of the stove and the quiet of the building around her. From the second floor she could hear something she had heard earlier. A low sound from the Ferrara apartment. A song in Italian, sung quietly in the way music got. When the evening got later, and the children were asleep, and the adults were singing for themselves, rather than for the holiday, she could not hear the words. She did not need to. She opened the ledger one more time. She wrote in the dark, by feel, knowing where the page was, because she had been writing in this ledger for months, and her hands knew it. She wrote, December 24th. Evening, 21 days. Candle done. Everyone still here. She closed the ledger. She went to bed. From the second floor, the Italian singing had gone quiet. The building was doing what it did at late evening in December, which was its own slow and particular things. The wood settling, and the pipes ticking, and the 43 people inside it breathing in the dark, and the stove in the kitchen was doing what it did, which was enough, and in the morning it would be Christmas, and Harrington would have kept his word or he would not have kept his word. And either way the coal would be 4 days closer to gone, and the building would still be standing, which was the only accounting that mattered tonight. The man Harrington sent was named Callahan. He arrived on the morning of December 29th, which was 4 days after Christmas, and 2 days before the end of the month, which was the deadline Harrington had given himself, and which he had therefore met. Technically, in the sense that technically allowed. He arrived with a canvas tool bag and the unhurried manner of a man who went into basements for a living and had long since made peace with what basements were. Eva met him at the door. He was perhaps 40, with red hands from the cold, and the particular competence in his face of a man who had learned mechanical things by taking them apart and reassembling them until the reassembly was correct. He looked at the building and then at her. Mrs. Stern, he said. Callahan. Mr. Harrington sent me. I know, Eva said. Come in. She took him to the basement. She had been down to the basement many times since the boiler stopped, to check the coal cellar, to look at the boiler in the way of someone who did not know exactly what they were looking at but felt that looking was better than not looking. She knew the basement well enough by now to move through it without the lantern in the parts near the stairs. Though she brought the lantern anyway for Callahan, he set his bag down in front of the boiler. He looked at it. He did not touch it immediately. He looked at it from the front and then moved to the left side and then the right. The way a person moved around something they were reading rather than touching, letting the visual information come before the mechanical. Then he crouched down and looked at the base. Chapter. Then he stood up and put both hands on the main water line and moved them slowly along the pipe. Eva stood with the lantern and watched and did not say anything. She had learned from 14 months of managing a building that the best thing you could do when a person who knew something was doing the thing they knew was to hold the light and stay out of the way. He opened a panel on the side of the boiler. He looked inside with a focused lamp he had brought in his canvas bag, moving it slowly. He was quiet. The valve, he said. After a while, Eva thought about Mr. Metzger. The pressure relief valve, she said. Callahan looked at her over his shoulder. Yes, he said. He said it with the particular emphasis of someone who had expected to be explaining a thing and found the explanation was not needed. How bad? Eva said. Bad enough. Callahan said. It has been cycling wrong for a while. From the look of it, the boiler has been building pressure inconsistently, which means the steam has not been reaching the upper floors at the pressure it needs. He stood up. When it got cold enough, the inconsistency tipped over into failure. What does it cost to fix? Eva said. Callahan looked at the valve. He reached in and touched it with 2 fingers. $14. He said. Maybe 16. Depending on whether the seat needs replacing as well. $14. The number Mr. Metzger had told her at the kitchen table. The number she had written to Harrington about. The number that had been in Harrington's hands since December 16th. 13 days ago? How long to repair? She said. 2 hours. Callahan said. If I have the part. He tapped his canvas bag. I have the part. Eva stood in the basement with the lantern in her hand and looked at this man who had arrived with the right part already in his bag, which meant the part had been purchased at some point before this morning, which meant the decision to purchase it had been made before this morning, which meant that somewhere between December 16th and December 29th, Harrington had known the part and the price and had had it purchased and had waited until the 29th of December to send it. She did not say any of this. She said, then please start. She went upstairs. She went to the first floor and knocked on 1A. Mrs. Rosen opened it. The repairman is here, Eva said. He is working on the boiler now. It will take approximately 2 hours. Mrs. Rosen looked at her. The expression on her face moved through something Eva watched without naming. 2 hours. Mrs. Rosen said. Yes. Mrs. Rosen turned and said something into the apartment. Eva heard children's voices responding. Mrs. Rosen turned back. I will tell the others, she said. I was going to. Eva said. I know. Mrs. Rosen said. I will tell them too. You go downstairs. Eva went back downstairs. She stood in the doorway of the boiler room and watched Callahan work. He worked with the efficiency of a man doing something he had done many times, each movement preceding the next in a logical order. Tools laid out on the floor in the sequence he would need them. He had opened the boiler and accessed the valve mechanism and was working inside the opening with the running quiet commentary of a person talking themselves through a procedure. She watched him and thought about the $14. She thought about the 43 people in this building who had burned their own coal for 26 days because a $14 part had not been replaced. She thought about Mr. Metzger's 4 days of coal remaining, and the Rosen family's 5 days and the 4 days she and Lena had. She thought about the coal she had given out from the building cellar on December 15th. The 140 pounds she had distributed on her own authority to people who needed it because she could not think of a reason not to that was stronger than the reason to. She thought about the letter she had written on Christmas Eve, the letter that had said the record of what is true will exist in the building's ledger regardless of what you decide. She had mailed it on the morning of December 25th. She did not know if it had arrived before or after Callahan had been sent. She did not know if it mattered which. What mattered was that Callahan was here now with the right part in a canvas bag and 2 hours of work between the building and heat. The upper floors, she said. Callahan did not look up. What about them? When you fix the valve, will the heat reach the top floors correctly? He paused. Should, he said. The pipes look intact from here. Fix the valve and the system should run. He glanced back at her. 5-story building. This boiler size. The valve cycling correctly. Yes, you will get heat on the 5th floor. Eva stood in the basement doorway and thought about the 5th floor. She thought about the room that had been 32 degrees at 2 in the morning 3 weeks ago, when she had sat on the floor next to the stove and watched the coal catch and felt the heat come back into the air. She thought about Lena's fever and the thermometer borrowed from Miriam, and the 103 degrees, and the honey ginger preparation, and Ruth Rosen reading aloud. She stood in the doorway and watched Callahan work. After 40 minutes, he stopped and lit the pilot, the small fire that would start the larger fire, and they both watched the flame catch and hold. Callahan made an adjustment. The flame adjusted with it, becoming steadier, becoming what it was supposed to be. He closed the panel. They waited. The boiler made a sound. A new sound, not the irregular sound she had heard in November. The sound she had described as between broken and working. This was a different sound, a building sound, the sound of something running the way it was built to run, the sound of water beginning to heat, and pressure beginning to build, and a system coming back to life after 26 days of being not alive. Callahan was watching the pressure gauge. The needle moved, slowly at first, then with more purpose, climbing through the range where it needed to be. They listened. From somewhere above them, muffled by the floors and the pipes, came a sound Eva recognized from before December 3rd. A sound she had not heard in 26 days. The sound of the steam pipes knocking as the heat moved through them for the first time in nearly a month. The metal expanding around the heat, the joints adjusting, the system telling itself and everyone who could hear it that something was moving again that had been still. Knock. Then again. Then again. Slower. The metal finding its temperature. And then, from above, that sound. Fainter. Through the building's floors and wall. She thought she could hear voices. Not words. Just the sound that people made when something they had been waiting for arrived. She looked at Callahan. He was writing on a piece of paper from his shirt pocket. The amount. The work description. The date. He tore it from the pad and held it out to her. She took it. $16.50. She looked at the number. $16.50. For 26 days, without heat. Against the $31 a month Harrington had been receiving from this building. She held the paper. Thank you, she said. For coming. Callahan picked up his bag. He looked at the boiler one more time. It should run now, he said. Tell your landlord to have it looked at in the spring, before next winter. The seat on that valve is old. It will need replacing properly before too long. I will tell him, Eva said. Callahan went up the stairs. Eva stood alone in the basement with the lantern and the running boiler and the paper with the number on it. She listened to the boiler. The sound it made was the sound of a system finding its rhythm. The irregular knocking of the pipes settling into the steadier sound of heat moving through a building that had been waiting for it. floor by floor, beginning to be warm in the way a building was supposed to be warm. She put her hand on the nearest pipe. Cold, then less cold, then warm. She stood with her hand on the pipe and felt the warmth come. Then she went upstairs. She went to the first floor. She put her hand on the radiator near the stairwell. The radiator that had been cold since the 3rd of December. Warm, getting warmer. From inside the Rosen apartment she could hear the children's voices and the sound of the sewing machine, which had started again. And underneath all of that, just barely audible, the sound of the radiator in their apartment beginning to tick as the heat reached it. She went upstairs. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The Kaufman door opened before she reached the radiator. Mrs. Kaufman stood in the doorway with her hand on her stomach and looked at Eva. "It is warm," Mrs. Kaufman said. "I can feel it." "Yes," Eva said. Mrs. Kaufman looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Stern." Eva looked at her and thought about what to say. She thought about the 26 days and the letters and the $16.50 and Callahan with his canvas bag and the part he had been carrying. "I am glad it is working," she said. She went up. 4th floor. She heard David's voice through the door, speaking to Herschel. Lighter than it had been in weeks. She knocked. David opened the door. Behind him, across the apartment, Herschel was sitting up in bed, not lying down, sitting up, looking toward the window, and on his face was the specific expression of a man who had been listening to the pipes and knew what the pipes were saying. "The radiator," David said. "It made a sound. It will warm up," Eva said. "Give it 20 minutes." David looked at her with the expression of a man who had been through something and was on the other side of it. 26 days, he said. "Yes," Eva said. Herschel, across the apartment, turned and looked at her as if he had heard, which the building's thin walls made possible. He nodded once. She nodded back. She went up to the 5th floor. She opened the door of her apartment. Cold? Still, the way it had been cold since December 3rd. She stood in the doorway, and then, from the corner of the room, from the radiator that ran along the north wall under the window, she heard the sound, knock. Then again, slower, the metal finding its temperature, the air inside the pipe adjusting to the heat that was rising through the building from the basement, floor by floor, traveling the full height of the building to reach the room where she and Lena were the coldest, because they were the highest, and the heat always had to travel the farthest to reach the top. She walked to the radiator. She crouched down and put both hands on it. Cold still, then less cold, then, slowly, definitively, warm. She kept her hands on it and felt the warmth increase, degree by degree, the slow and certain warmth of a system doing what it was built to do. She opened the ledger. She wrote the date, December 29th, 1901. She wrote Callahan, 2 hours, pressure relief valve, $16.50, boiler running. Then she turned to the margin. She wrote, "The radiator is warm. I am sitting on the floor with my hands on it, and it is warm and getting warmer. 26 days. The part cost $16.50, and it has been cold for 26 days, and the part was in his bag when he came. She stopped. She sat on the floor, with her hands on the warm radiator, and looked at what she had written. Then she wrote, in the smallest handwriting she used. The handwriting for things she was not sure she had the right words for. Yet, I am going to keep this ledger, not for Harrington. The rent and the expenses. Yes, those too. Those are what I am here for. But I am going to keep the other ledger, the one in the margins, the one with the temperatures and the coal counts, and Miriam at 2 in the morning, and Ruth reading aloud in the Ferrara kitchen, and Mr. Metzger's wife's simmering pot, and the 26 days. That ledger is also a true account of this building. I am the only one keeping it. I intend to keep it. She closed the ledger. The radiator under her hands was warm now. Genuinely warm. The heat in it, real and present and not going anywhere. She sat on the floor of her 5th-floor apartment on the 29th of December, 1901, with both hands on the warm radiator, and she let herself feel it. She did not time how long she sat there. Long enough. January came without ceremony. There was no particular morning when December became January that announced itself as different from the morning before. Eva woke on the 1st of January at 5:30, as she woke every morning, and went to the stove and checked the coal and put the kettle on. The radiator in the corner was warm. It had been warm since the 29th of December, and had stayed warm through the 3 days since, running steadily. The sound of it in the night. Now a different sound from the sound of the building settling. She put her hand on the radiator every morning. It was always warm. She wrote this in the ledger every morning anyway. January was the month of aftermath, which was a different kind of hard, from the hard of the emergency itself. The emergency had a shape. You could feel where it started. December 3rd, and where it turned, December 29th. The aftermath had no shape. It was the ordinary life of the building reasserting itself, except that the ordinary life of the building had been changed by the 26 days in ways that were not all visible yet. Some of them were visible immediately. Mrs. Zielinska came to the Ferrara kitchen on the coldest mornings of January. Not every morning. On the mornings when her hands would not work without the extra warmth. She and Mrs. Ferrara had developed a system of communication that did not require a shared language, a system of gesture and expression, and the shorthand of 2 women who had been watching each other across a hallway for 3 years and had learned more than they had known they had learned. On the 3rd visit, Mrs. Zielinska brought her own tea, which was the thing you did when you wanted to say you were not a guest anymore. The Rosen children still came to Miriam Cohen's apartment in the afternoon. Not because of the cold now, but because Miriam had started giving Ruth Rosen additional reading on the evenings she came. The kind of reading that prepared a girl for something beyond the garment factory. And Ruth came for the reading, and her younger siblings came because they were her younger siblings. Mr. Metzger received Mrs. Kaufmann's soup on several more evenings in January. He returned the pot clean. The arrangement had become what it was without either of them deciding it was an arrangement. Eva wrote all of this in the margin. She also wrote what happened on January 11th. The baby. She heard the sounds beginning in the Kaufmann apartment in the afternoon. Sounds she recognized. And she knocked on the door and found Mr. Kaufman already there, and they sent the older children to the Rosens and sent for the midwife from Orchard Street, and Eva stayed. Because she had stayed the last 2 times, and Mrs. Kaufman looked at her when she came in with the look of a woman who wanted a specific person in the room, and Eva was that person. The baby was born at 9:17 in the evening. She was small and certain about her presence. The specific personality of newborns who arrived with something to say. Mrs. Kaufman held her with the expression Eva had seen on her face twice before. The expression that was its own thing, specific to the moment when a person who has been carrying another person for 9 months meets them for the first time. Eva went home at 11. Lena was awake, waiting. Is it here? Lena said. She is here. Eva said, Ego. Lena's face did the thing it did when she was pleased about something. I told Mrs. Kaufman I would help with her, Lena said. With the baby? When she came. I know, Eva said. You can go in the morning. Lena went back to bed. Eva sat at the table and opened the ledger. She wrote January 11. Mrs. Kaufman's baby. A girl. 9:17 in the evening. Small and certain. Then, she wrote, in the margin, the building today had 43 people in it at the start and 44 at the end. That has not happened before in 6 years. I do not know if it matters. It seems like it matters. She closed the ledger. She sat at the table for a moment in the quiet kitchen with the warm radiator and the stove doing its work, and Lena asleep in the next room, and the building around her doing what it did at midnight in January, which was hold everyone inside it through the cold. Then she went to bed. On the 17th of January, Herschel died, not from cold directly, and not from the fever directly, though the fever had taken something from him that his body, at 68 years old, had not been able to fully recover. His heart stopped at some point in the night, between the last time David checked on him before sleep and the morning when David found him. Eva heard David in the hall at 6 in the morning. She heard the quality of his footsteps, which were the footsteps of a man who had just found something out. And she opened the door. She saw his face. She went with him. Herschel was in the bed with the gray blanket over him, the blanket she had brought down from her closet 6 weeks ago. His face had the quiet of a face that had been sleeping and had decided, at some point in the sleeping, not to come back. She stood with David in the room for a while. She did not say the things people said. She was not sure those things were what the moment needed. What the moment needed was for someone to be in the room with David and not leave. And that was what she did. After a while, David said, in Yiddish, he was cold this winter. Yes, Eva said. He did not complain about it. David said. He said he had been cold in worse places. He said that to me too, Eva said. David looked at the blanket on the bed. He said the blanket helped. He said, he told me to make sure you knew. Eva looked at the blanket. She thought about the morning she had taken it from the closet. She thought about holding it for a moment before she put it in the bag at the funeral. The specific discomfort that had made her unable to use it and unable to give it away until a morning in December when a man on the 4th floor had a fever and no extra blanket. I am glad it helped, she said. She helped David with what needed to be done. She helped him contact the landsman shaft. She stayed with him through the morning and into the afternoon. And when the landsman shaft men came, she stood in the hallway and let the process be what it was. In the evening, Dovid told her he would be moving to his cousin in Brooklyn. "I will pay through February," he said. "The first, I have the money. You do not have to pay February." Eva said, "Given everything, I pay what I owe." He said, "When will you go?" Eva said, "After the service." He said, "End of next week." She nodded. He went back into the apartment. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went upstairs and opened the ledger and wrote the date and the name Herschel, and she wrote Heart. In the night, he said the blanket helped. Dovid will go to Brooklyn at the end of next week. Room 4A will be empty. She looked at the empty room entry. Then she wrote in the margin, "He told Dovid to make sure I knew the blanket helped. He made sure I would know. I am writing it here, so I do not forget. He made sure." Harrington's reply to the Christmas Eve letter arrived on January 4th. 2 sentences. He appreciated her thorough documentation, and the boiler repair had been authorized as quickly as circumstances allowed. Circumstances allowed. Eva read the letter twice. Then she put it in the ledger pocket and wrote in the margin 2 sentences. Circumstances allowed. I am going to write Harrington about the coal cellar accounting. I have every pound documented. I intend to present it. She wrote the letter on January 8th. She itemized every pound, every apartment, every date. 140 pounds at $1.25 per 100 pounds came to $1.75. Harrington's reply came on January 14th. He credited $1.50, not $1.75. $1.50. 25 cents less than the full amount, with no explanation for the difference. Eva sat with the letter. She wrote in the margin, $1.50, not $1.75. The difference is 25 cents. I know why he took the 25 cents. He is marking that something happened he did not authorize. The 25 cents is how he is marking it. I am going to accept the $1.50, and I am going to remember the 25 cents. She recorded both numbers in the ledger. In the last week of January, Dovid moved to Brooklyn. He left on a Friday morning with his one suitcase and the bundled items that had been Herschel's, which he was taking to the landsman shaft. He knocked on Eva's door before he went. She opened it, and he held out something to her. A small wooden box. Old. The wood worn smooth in the way of things that had been handled for many years. "Herschel's," he said. "He had nothing in it, but it is a good box." Eva took the box. She thought about Herschel telling Dovid to make sure she knew the blanket helped. She thought about the sentence she had written in the ledger. She thought about 68 years old, and a fever in a cold room, and the gray blanket, and the north-facing window. "Safe travels," she said. "Take care of the building," he said. He went down the stairs. She stood in the doorway and listened to his footsteps go down, and down, and down, and the street door open and close. Then the building was quiet, in the way of a building that had one fewer person in it. She went inside. She put the wooden box on the shelf where she kept the things that had meaning that did not fit anywhere else. Then she opened the ledger and wrote the date and wrote, "Dovid left this morning." The box 4A is empty. Then, in the margin, I have been managing this building for 16 months. In that time, 2 people have left, and 1 person has arrived. The building has had its boiler fail and its heat go out for 26 days, and has had a man die, and a baby born, and a fever, and a coal cellar distribution, and a Christmas Eve letter, and 25 cents that Harrington kept, to mark that something had happened he did not authorize. All of this is in the ledger. She paused. Then she wrote, I do not know what the ledger is. Exactly. It started as a rent book. It is something else now. She sat with that. Outside. January was doing what January did in New York, which was make February feel close and make spring feel very far. And the street was moving and loud and cold, and the building was standing there holding the people inside it, and the radiator was warm. Eva put her hand on it. Then she went to start dinner. The window opened on a morning in March. Eva had been trying it for a week, going to the kitchen window each morning and lifting the lower sash an inch to test the air that came in. In February, the air was sharp enough to push her back immediately and make the argument for keeping it closed. In early March, it was the same. Sharp, but with something under the sharpness that had not been there in February. Something that suggested the season was doing the internal work of changing without showing it yet on the surface. On the morning of March 12th, the air that came in was cold but not sharp. She left the window open an inch. She stood at the table and felt the air move into the room. It lifted the corner of the page she had been writing on, and she put her hand on the page to hold it. Then she left her hand on the page. She thought about all the windows in this building that had been sealed since November. The newspaper in the frames and the cloth strips along the bottom of the doors, and the economy of keeping every degree of warmth inside rooms that had been trying all winter to lose their heat to the outside. She thought about all of that coming off now, slowly, as the weather permitted. The building opening itself back up, the way a person who had been holding tension for a long time slowly let it go. Lena came into the kitchen. She was dressed for school. Her cough had been gone since late December. Eva had written the last mention of it in the ledger on January 3rd. No cough this morning. 4 days clear. She had not written about it since because there was nothing to write. The window, Lena said. The window? Eva said. Lena went to it and put her face near the inch of open space and breathed the outside air. She closed her eyes for a moment. It smells like the street, she said. The actual street, not just cold. March smells different from December. Eva said. Lena opened her eyes. Can we open it more? Not yet, Eva said. A few more weeks. Lena accepted this and went to get her school bag. Eva went back to the ledger. She opened it to the page she had been writing on, the one with the lifted corner. She read what she had written that morning, which was the daily accounting, the habit she had not broken since December 3rd, even after the boiler was repaired. The daily numbers, now radiator temperature, morning, coal in bucket, days remaining, building maintenance items, if any. The radiator was warm every morning. The coal was adequate. The maintenance items were the ordinary things of a building in March. A hinge on the second floor. The hallway window she had fixed herself in February, with a plane she had borrowed from Mr. Metzger. Mr. Metzger had watched her plane the window frame. He had stood in the hallway with his arms crossed and not said anything until she was done. When she was done, he said, "Good." One word. She had written it in the margin that afternoon. She turned to the margin now and read back through what she had written since January. Herschel and the wooden box. Ruth Kaufman, 6 weeks old. Named for the oldest Rosen girl and the way that names moved through this neighborhood in successive generations. David in Brooklyn. The $1.50, the 25 cents Harrington kept. Solomon Becker, the new tenant in 4A, who had moved in the second week of February and had within his first week asked her about the coal situation for next winter. She had written about this. He asked about next winter in his first week. He is paying attention. She had told him the boiler would be checked in the spring. She had already written Harrington about the spring inspection. On January 2nd, while the memory of 26 days was recent enough to make the writing easy, she turned to a fresh page. She wrote the date, March 12th, 1902. She wrote the daily numbers. Then she turned to the margin. She wrote, "It is 3.5 months since the boiler went out. The building has a working boiler and a new person in it. Herschel is gone. David is in Brooklyn. The wooden box is on the shelf." She paused. Then she wrote, "I have been thinking about next winter since January. Before this winter, I did not think about next winter until next winter arrived. I thought about this winter while it was happening, and then I moved on. I did not carry what I learned forward. That is the wrong approach." She looked at what she had written. She thought about the list she had been building in the margin since January. Not on a single page, but spread across many pages. A sentence here and a sentence there as each thing occurred to her. Check the boiler in October. Not November. October. Write the letter before the sound starts. Write it in September, before the season. So the letter is in Harrington's hands before there is urgency. Tell the building about the coal loading method at the beginning of the season, before the emergency reveals that some people know it and some do not. Ask Metzger in October what he knows about the boiler. Ask while the asking is easy, and not while urgency makes it feel like something else. Tell new tenants at the beginning of winter what the building knows. Not just the rules of the building. Not just the rent amount and the notice period. The actual knowledge. The coal method and the door cloth and the newspaper windows and the Ferrara kitchen and Mr. Metzger's simmering pot and what the pipes sounded like when they were working and what they sounded like when they were not. She had written all of this across the margins of January and February. Now she turned to the last pages of the ledger, which she had been leaving blank for the overflow of the margin when the margin ran out of room. She opened to the last blank page. She wrote at the top, in her clearest handwriting, the handwriting she used for things she intended to be legible for a long time, what this building knows. She looked at the heading. Then she began to write. She wrote about the coal loading method, the specific configuration, the angles of the pieces, and the reason for the angles, and where the knowledge had come from. Mrs. Rosen's mother. Warsaw, a year she could not have named, but that had sent the knowledge across an ocean inside a woman who was now 81 years old and sat by the stove every morning and had never been asked. She wrote about the door cloth and the Ferrara kitchen, and the newspaper windows, and the simmering pot, and the specific hour of the morning when the Ferrara oven had heated the kitchen to its warmest, and the way that warmth could be borrowed by someone who needed it, by simply being in the room. She wrote about the coal line on Canal Street, and what 40 pounds a day meant, and what it meant that the retail price was higher than the bulk price, and who paid the difference, and why. She wrote about what Mr. Metzger knew about pressure relief valves, and why the seat would need replacing before next winter, and the name of the man on Delancey Street, and the address. She wrote about the boiler sound, the sound between broken and working. She wrote, "If you hear a sound like this from the boiler, write the letter immediately. Do not wait for the sound to resolve itself. It will become silence, and silence from a boiler in December is not resolution." She wrote for a long time. When she was done, she read what she had written. 4-page, dense with the specific and the practical, the things that had no value in the abstract and enormous value in a building that was going to need them again. Because buildings needed these things again. Because winter came back. Because the knowledge that existed in a building was only as durable as the people who carried it. And people moved and changed, and the knowledge could leave with them if it was not written down. She closed the ledger. The window was still open. The air was still coming in. Still March. Still carrying the cold left over from February. But carrying the other thing too. The thing that meant the season was changing, and the window did not need to be shut against it anymore. Eva put her hand on the window sash. She thought about next October. She thought about writing the boiler letter in September. She thought about Solomon Becker asking about next winter with the directness of a man who was paying attention, and about what she would tell him, and about the 4 pages at the back of the ledger that she would show him, that she would show anyone who asked, that she would offer through the door, the way the information should have been moving all along. She thought about Harrington's 2 sentences. She thought about $16.50. She thought about the 25 cents he had kept. She was going to write the spring inspection letter in April, and she was going to write it clearly, and she was going to include in it the sentence she had been composing since January. The sentence that said, "I am keeping a record of the building's condition and the building's needs, and I intend to continue keeping it. And I am available to share this record with you at any time." She did not know what Harrington would do with that sentence. She knew what she was going to do with it. She lifted the window 2 more inches. 1 inch became 3. The air moved through the kitchen with the full presence of a March morning, cold and present and smelling of the street and of the season that was coming. The bread from the Ferrara kitchen 2 floors below, rising through the building the way it rose every morning. The smell of the bread and the heat that were the same thing. Eva stood at the window. Behind her, the building was doing what it did in the morning. The Rosen machine starting up. The Ferrara oven going. The sounds of 44 people beginning their day in 11 apartments in a building that had a working boiler and 4 pages of what it knew written in the back of a ledger on the kitchen table. She heard Lena on the stairs, going down to school. The sound of her footsteps. On each step, the sound Eva knew better than any sound in the building. The specific rhythm of a 9-year-old going somewhere she intended to be. She listened to the footsteps go down, and down, and down. The front door opened. The street sounds came in briefly, the full sound of Hester Street in March. And then the door closed, and the sounds settled back to what they were through a closed door. Present, but contained. Eva looked at the street from the open window. She thought about the building behind her. Solomon Becker, in 4A, asking about next winter. Ruth Kaufman, 6 weeks old, who had been born into a warm building and had never been cold in her life, and did not know she had been born a month after 26 days of cold, and that her building knew things about warmth it had not known before those 26 days. Miriam Cohen, who had bought a thermometer in September, in case it became useful. Mrs. Fihada, who had been heating her kitchen with bread since before she came to this country, and would keep doing it long after Eva was gone. Mr. Metzger, in 1B, with his hat and his tools, and his wife's simmering pot method, and the things he knew and was willing to tell you if you sat down at his table and asked. She turned from the window. She went to the table. She opened the ledger to the March 12th page. She wrote, in the margin, in the handwriting she used for the things she was still working out, March 12th. Window open 3 inches. The building went through a winter with a broken boiler, and 43 people, and 1 working stove per apartment, and enough knowledge between them to manage it. Not easily. Not without cost. Herschel is gone. Room 4A was empty for 3 weeks. Lena had a fever. I ran out of coal money and borrowed against an account, and carried coal upstairs on Sunday evenings and wrote letters that did not always get the answer I was asking for. She stopped. She wrote, but everyone is here. Ruth Kaufman makes 45. And she was born warm. Solomon Becker is asking about next winter, which means he is the kind of man who thinks forward. She looked at what she had written. Then she wrote, I have been managing this building for 16 months. I know it differently now than I knew it in October. I know which pipe knocks in the night, and what temperature makes it knock, and which family burns their coal the right way, and which family could burn it better if someone told them, and whose hands stiffen in the cold, and who has knowledge that has been in their family for 2 generations, and who will offer it if asked, and who will use it if given. She paused. Then she wrote, this is what I did not know how to keep before this winter. I know how to keep it now. It is in the ledger, the other ledger, the one in the margins. She closed the ledger. She stood at the open window one more time. The street below was Hester Street in March, doing what it always did, moving and loud and cold and present, the vendors setting up, the bread woman with her basket moving through the crowd, the coal boy on the corner, bundled less than in December, calling something she could not hear from up here. She looked at the coal boy and thought about next December, when the coal line would form again at Petrowitz's, and the people she had been watching through this winter would go back to it. She thought about the woman with the canvas bag from the building 2 doors down. The woman she had been watching all winter and had never spoken to. Next December, she decided, if she saw that woman in the coal line, she would speak to her. She would not speak about policy or about the settlement houses or about the things that were coming slowly through the city and the law. The Tenement House Act that was beginning to change what landlords were required to provide. The changes that would take years to reach the actual rooms of the actual buildings. She would speak to her about the coal method, about the door cloth, about the Ferrara kitchen. She would say, here is what I know. Here is what someone in my building knew and taught me. Here is what the woman on the floor below her knew, and what I carry with me from it. Because that was what you did with what you had learned. You carried it forward. You offered it through the door. She left the window open and went to start breakfast.